Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read. Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Yes, good evening. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews. Welcome back to another live stream, live reading tonight. It's Friday, the 12th of the 12th, 2025. The year is almost over. I remember heading into 2025 thinking what craziness is going to happen, and nothing really happened. But I think the reason nothing happened is because I just stopped paying attention to the mainstream media pretty much altogether, because I've just been focusing on reading books and making videos and bringing broadcasts to you fine people. So good to see you if you're tuning in tonight. Let's get the book count in the right place so you can look at what we're going to be reading. Welcome. It's lovely to be back. I was here last Friday. I was here the Friday before that. But we've enjoyed a good string of uninterrupted, successful live streams with no technical hiccups. I'm going to risk jinxing it by saying that. And as I say that, I'm going to open my little stats window just to make sure nothing weird starts happening. Because previously when I've mentioned that we're having a good live stream, that's when the weirdness starts to begin. But we will see. So far, so good. I think we are okay. And the lights are blinking and the numbers are looking like they should. So I hope you're all doing well out there. And if you're watching on the replay, I hope you're also doing well out there in the future time where maybe the days are longer or shorter. Definitely one of those two, in fact. And maybe you're watching this from 2026, 2027. Maybe you're listening or watching from even beyond. It would be a miracle indeed, depending on how long this channel can survive and how long this information will be up there. But I think we're not really at risk of getting cancelled or banned for reading this particular book. Although it is very prophetic, it's very revealing, it's quite amazing the things that he told us back in 1970 about the future. I don't think there's any really important cats being let out of the bag in this book. The main thing that we get out of reading it is just what an astonishing amount of revelations and predictions he makes in this book that came true. Was he just incredibly talented and able to see the trend and the patterns of where things were heading? Or was there some sort of plan? Was he in on it? And was he letting a bit of revealing a bit of that to us, revelation of the method and predictive programming in this book? I tend to think it's a little bit of the latter, but it has been an excellent read indeed. He told us back in 1970 that the internet was coming. He has also broke down to us why communism failed in the USSR after the Bolshevik Revolution, but Marxism was essentially still pretty good. He also talked to us about sort of weapons that could be used to change the mood of an entire nation of people. And he has also been letting us know what's going to happen in the world in the technotronic era, which is Zbigniew Brzezinski's term for the post-industrial era. So after the industry is gone, the factories have been offshored, there's nothing being made, you're now into a service economy, or a servant economy, maybe it should be called. What is in store? And so he correctly predicted back in the 60s when he was writing it, and 1970 when it was published, he was correctly telling us that the tech bros were going to take over. He was correctly telling us that it was going to be all about data and information and gathering that. And the word for gathering all that is surveillance, although they usually don't use that word when they're talking about it. But data and information and gathering it all and pumping it into vast data farms and using that to manage the activity of the citizenry, the economy. He foretold all that in this book. It's pretty astonishing, actually, and I'm not surprised that there aren't new copies of it being printed and spread around. So we're going to be continuing tonight with our reading. I think we've got probably tonight and maybe next week, and then we should have the book finished, and we will be wrapped up for Christmas, and it comes to a nice conclusion, we can have a week or two off, and then we'll be getting into the next book, which I think a lot of people are very excited about. I'm extremely excited about it because it is the book Foundations, Their Power and Influence by Renee Wormser. That's going to be another hefty one to get through. It's quite a long book, but I think we're going to learn a heck of a lot about how the world really works. And if you've been hanging around on this channel for any amount of time, you'll probably know that on the playlists tab, particularly on YouTube, but also on Rumble and Odyssey, you can check out the books that we've read through previously. And there's quite a few of them now. We've done a good amount. They're all up on YouTube. Not all of them are up on Rumble and Odyssey yet, but somebody told me in a comment on one of my shorts that I should mention this because I forget to mention that we do have quite an extensive back catalogue of readings already published and there for people to enjoy. And we have done a whole bunch of books in their entirety on the channel. We've done Fabian Freeway, we've done the Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, we've done The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin. We did The Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells, which is the first book to feature in my email series, The Continuity of Control. We have also done Has Man a Future by Bertrand Russell, where he scared the bejesus out of us by depicting in all its gory possibility the potential catastrophe of a nuclear war. And we've also read through Lusitania by Colin Simpson, one of the first false flag operations, which was used to bring America into the war, and a lot of questionable activities surrounding how that incident was reported, how it was presented to the public, and how it was investigated when the the commission, which was created to find out what happened, was put into place, right? So that's a really excellent book to show you that these scams, these schemes, these cons, they go back a way. These are the same kinds of strategies, methods, tactics. These are the same sorts of techniques used again and again and again. And we just keep falling for them because we are distracted. We are inundated with stupid bullshit, which is my term for things like sports and trivia and quiz shows and the latest series of Stranger Things and reality TV and news, right? Mainstream media news. And all these are the things that we're given. Computer games. I enjoy these things. I'll be honest, right? I got sick recently and I had a little backslide into computer games. I downloaded a game, put it on my wife's phone, and I did sink a few hours into that. And it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. It was nice. But in the end, I had to uninstall it and get it out of my life because I was like stealing her phone, taking it to the toilet with me. And it was just, I recognized the signs of addiction in myself, where I'd be playing it and not doing things that I was supposed to be doing around the house or with my son. And so I thought, right, I got to get rid of this. I uninstalled it and got rid of it. So these things are given to us to occupy us, to make sure that we waste time, precious time, the only resource that we truly have, and who knows how much of it we have. Precious seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years that we can spend to improve ourselves, to help other people, to uplift the consciousness of the species, to contribute something beautiful, something meaningful, something truthful into the world. We can create amazing things with this precious resource that we have. But so many of us choose to squander it, to waste it, to kill it, right? We use this phrase, killing time. It's crazy to me. And I've killed my fair share of time. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not judging anybody, right? I've watched way too much television. I've watched way too many films. I've played far too many hours of computer games. I don't even want to get into it because it makes me feel ashamed when I reflect on it. But that's what so many of us do, and that's what all these things are given to us for. They want us wasting time. They don't want us being productive. They don't want us learning from the publications and the books that they put out, which tell us about the plans and the schemes and the cons that they're going to run ahead of time. They don't want us doing that. They don't want us uplifting our awareness of the systems that we live in and the way they work and the lies and the deceits and the illusions, right? They don't want us doing that. They want us arguing about sports ball. They want us obsessed with the latest popularity contest, whether that's singing or dancing on ice. That was a thing for a while, although I don't see that so much or hear people talking about it so much. there's all manner of ridiculous things that we can waste our time on, and they're put out there, they're given to us for the purpose of stopping us reading books like this. And I'll be honest with you right now, it's not an easy book. There's times when I've been reading this and I've been on the live stream and my brain, I'm reading it and I'm saying the words and my brain can't even keep up and interpret and process what I'm reading in real time as I'm reading it. So I'm going to have to go back and check the notes and the replays and refresh myself with some of the nuances and the ins and outs of what he's saying, because it's highly academic. It's dry. It's not entertaining. It's analytical. It is written in a kind of far out, like not far out as in trippy and weird, but far out as in high level. He's not writing with human emotions in mind or a story or a narrative. This is analytical. This is strategic. This is somebody who is able to look at the systems which govern the minds and the behaviors of many millions of people and assess the efficiency of that system and then find ways to tweak it and change it and alter it, right? This is why he is the master strategist. This is why he is chosen to partner with David Rockefeller to found the Trilateral Commission to bring together Japan and Europe and the USA and start that process of standardizing, harmonizing the systems and the laws and the trade deals and all that sort of thing, right? This is high level stuff. He's in outer space looking down on all these things. He's not in it with the rest of us. You see what I mean? Frank says, written by a department. It very well could be. He could have a whole team of people. You know, they talk about ghost writers. It could be a ghost team of writers, right? Because the level of research and the detail that would have had to go into it seems a lot. I mean, I like reading, and I'm sure we all like researching, particularly on this channel and in the sort of other channels that we frequent. But there's only so much one person can do when you got a family and you got a mortgage and you got a job and you've got children and all this other stuff that takes up time in our lives. Okay, there's only so much reading and research you can do, and to put such a massive amount of information together, giving us the history and the interpretation of all these systems, these isms, communism and liberalism. He did a big section on in the last reading we did, capitalism, technotronicism. I don't think that is an ism yet, is it? But what's the thing I'm thinking of? Technocratic control. It's all academic. It's all abstract. And unless that's just his skill, his forte, it is up for question. Did he write this book on his own? And he did a lot of books. It's not the only one he did, right? He did The Grand Chessboard. He did one called, I think it was called The Great Failure. Let's have a look. Sorry, The Grand Failure. Oh, so he did The Grand Chessboard and he did The Grand Failure. And that's a whole book about why communism failed. It's a lot for one man. On top of this, he was advising presidents. He was appearing on primetime mainstream news as a talking head expert type person. And so was it all one person, or was he a construct? Did he have a team behind him? Was there somebody managing him off stage? It's a good question. And I think there's a good chance that all of our talking heads, all of these characters, these people who are rolled out as experts, as authorities, I think a lot of them are managed. There's people behind them telling them what to say, curating their look, right? I've got a team behind me. They told me to start wearing scarves, right? No, but there's nothing left to chance, I don't think. When you're on the television and you have access to the minds of so many millions of people, I don't think they leave anything to chance. And I remember when I was younger and more idealistic and less informed about how the world works, I used to play in bands, and I used to think about musicians and bands that I followed and listened to. And my background was jazz music, right, which can get quite complex, a lot of weird chords and time signatures and stuff like that. And I'd watch this pop music, and I think this stuff is so simple. It's very simple music. It wouldn't take you that long to learn a lot of the pop music that's out there. For an example, you can look up The Axis of Awesome. They have a video called 4 Chord Song. And it's the same 4 chords, but it fits 20 or 30 or 40 even different pop songs that are very well known and very mainstream. It's the same 4 chords, right? And I would think about this pop music, and I thought, this is pretty simple stuff. It's pretty straightforward. Why are they so famous? Why is this more well known and celebrated and loved than some of these extremely talented jazz musicians that I was aware of, or some of these extremely moving compositions that had really complex and nuanced arrangements and harmonies and chordal patterns, right? That I was not musically literate enough to even understand in a lot of cases, but it always puzzled me. And another aspect of it that puzzled me was how much responsibility a band can have. By that, I mean, you've got access to so many minds. You can say one thing and get that message out to so many people. Why don't they? Why don't they? Why don't they? And then what you start to realize as you get older and you read some of the books like Musical Truth by Mark Devlin, you start to realize that there's nothing left to chance. And if a band or a lead singer, I'm thinking Bono, for example, is recruited and speaking out about a certain cause, you can bet your bottom dollar that that cause is establishment approved. And they're not going to come out and talk about anything that is, they're never going to speak truth to power because they are put there by the power. I was quite naive. It took me a long time to realize that, but I was asking these questions as a young man. I was thinking, imagine the messages you could put out there, the influence you could have. You could really use that to say something meaningful and important. And instead, a lot of the time, it's just like, put your fucking hands up, or some self-promotion or something, some other shallow message that doesn't really need to be said and isn't important. So when it comes to having large audiences and having a lot of influence, they don't leave anything to chance. That's my point. And I think it's the same with Zbigniew Brzezinski. So he probably had his image, had the things he said, had the things that were written down in the book, very curated, very controlled. And maybe in the case of Between Two Ages, they put a bit too much in that book, because this is not reprinted. They're not updating it. They're not coming up with new editions. There's no like 2024 edition of Between Two Ages. There's just the first run and the second run, I think, printed back in the 70s and the 80s, and that's it. And that's why it's so expensive, and there aren't that many copies available at any one time. So we're very lucky to have one. He might have somebody might have messed up when they were putting this book together to put Zbignew's name on it. That's definitely a possibility. But I think it is worth reading for that reason. And a lot of books, like we read on this channel, they're all worth reading. It gives us a new perspective. It allows us to unplug a little bit, slow down. I know I'm speaking very fast, or I feel like I'm speaking very fast. Slow down a little bit, change the pace, and not be carried away on the tides of the constant media machine. And because that's what we're in. We're inundated with time wasting. We're inundated with current hot topic issues. That's every single issue that comes out seems like the most important thing, and seems like we have to pay attention to it and share it and send and talk about it, and it never ends. It's a hamster wheel. It's a deluge of constant news. And the word news, it's just new. It's just new information, new data, a new event, a new distraction, a new concoction, right? A new thing to be outraged about, a new thing to be scared of, a new thing to feel insecure about. And it's largely, for the most part, all distraction and theater and puppetry and shadows on the cave wall. Choose your metaphor and whichever one you prefer. So we try to avoid that on this channel. I did used to do shows where I would read news stories and dive into a bit of that. And I would try and like juxtapose the mainstream news with some of the alternative news, just to show you that the alternative stuff is way better and more interesting and more nuanced and well-researched and well-referenced and less emotionally manipulative in a lot of cases. But there's people doing that are a dime a dozen. And all they want you to look at is the new hot thing and the thing that nobody's talking about and the hot take and the connection that nobody's realized yet. And And it's exhausting, isn't it? I think it's very exhausting. We might get a better view if we start to look to the past. Alan Watts said on a recent talk that you get to see what's going to happen in the future by looking into the past. And it was also mentioned by Orwell in 1984. He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future. So we can read these books from the past. We can read these artifacts that were created before the internet, before the outrage engine got into full swing. It's always been there. But it used to be newspapers, and then it was television, and then it was radio, and then it was television, and then it was internet. And with each iteration, with each upgrade to the technology, it just got more powerful, more addictive, and they were able to add layers and layers to it to appeal to every different demographic, every different psychological makeup, every different personality, every different taste is catered for. So you've got somebody out there, no matter what your unique mix of interests and biases and blind spots are, there's someone out there. There's a group for you to join. There's a Pied Piper. There's a leader. There's an expert. There's a guru. And I've been through my fair share of them. And I still, to this day, find it hard to discern who is authentic, who is a Pied Piper, who's backed by money and teams that are off stage and unannounced and unacknowledged, who is backed by intelligence services, right? Who's funded by the CIA, who's funded by MI5, MI6, because there's bound to be plenty of those out there as well. Who's funded by Russia? Who's funded by China? It's tricky. It's hard. It is difficult to discern, which is why I started the channel, because I'm like, well, I'll just read the books myself. And why not? It makes more sense to go and do the reading and the research yourself rather than rely on somebody else to interpret the information, to tell you, oh, this book, it tells you this. And then you get into the book and you read it and you find out that quote's not there, or that idea's not there, or the claim is kind of misrepresented and wrong for the purposes of raising your cortisol and getting you angry. Oh, he said what, bruh? So do the reading yourself. That's the message. Spend the time. Invest the time. Don't waste the time. Don't kill the time. Spend the time. Invest the time in yourself, in your own consciousness, in your own awareness, your own understanding, your own ability to articulate what happened, where things are going, what are the agendas in play, what can we learn from Jimmy Carter's National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and founder of the Trilateral Commission. Right? The Trilateral Commission is still in existence to this day. The Prime Minister of England is a member of the Trilateral Commission. Doesn't it behoove us to go into the writings of the man who founded the organization, which our Prime Minister here in England belongs to, and glean some ideas about the worldview, the agendas they might be working towards? Because when these characters come up with predictions, I don't think they're just prognosticating about what they think might happen, making these educated guesses. I think it's more like, this is what we want to do. This is what we're going to do. And we're telling you. We might not say, this is what we are going to do. We'll say, oh, this is the way things are going. Like Yuval Noah Harari, he tells you it's going to be drugs and computer games for the useless classes. The era of free will, it's over, right? He said that. They make these predictions because that's where they want to take things. And we have to take these predictions seriously. But we can only take them seriously if we're aware of them, and we can only be aware of them if we go into the books and read them for ourselves to make sure that that we don't need the middleman leading us off Pied Piper style off the edge of a cliff or into a river or wherever it is that Pied Pipers lead you, right? And the other thing about Pied Pipers is you feel like someone else is doing something about it. Oh, that person there with their massive following, they're talking about this. That's great. I don't need to do anything now. I don't need to talk about it to the people in my life, my friends, family, spouse, colleagues, whatever it may be. So it's this false sense of security. It's this, it leads you into inaction. It leads you into laziness. It leads you into, someone else will take care of it. Trust in the plan, right? It's a QAnon type of view on things. So don't fall into that trap. Just because somebody else with a big audience is talking about it, they've got it covered, right? It's not, it's not covered. Like Mark Passio said, I've heard him say on many occasions, I don't got this, right? People think, oh, Mark Passio's talking about that. He's doing his thing. He's got this. He says, I don't got this. He needs hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of other people to step up to the plate and start contributing, start amplifying, start supporting in whatever way, shape, or form it suits and is possible. And we can all do something. We can all do something. So don't fall into that trap of inaction, because the Pied Piper's out there with his intelligence-backed, artificially inflated numbers of subscribers and views on his videos or her videos, because I'm sure there's females out there as well. Every voice counts. And I've said before on the channel, it's not about, you don't even have to do it on the internet. You can do it in real life. And even if you don't even do it in real life, even if you're just, even if you're not doing it to someone in real life, right? Even if you just have a rant while you make in the kitchen in the morning while you're making coffee, even just speaking truth out into reality is worth doing. It's cathartic. I rant, I go for a walk sometimes and I rant, and I wish I'd recorded them. I usually rant in here. I don't walk around sort of ranting out loud, because the other people walking their dogs are going to think I'm a bit strange and maybe call the police on me. But, I kind of like have these internal monologues where I rant. And if there was nobody around, I might speak out loud. If I'm relatively sure I'm not going to be overheard. And it's cathartic. And it's like practice. It is worth doing, because you articulate your ideas and your views on things, and you make connections, and you can surprise yourself sometimes with the route that you take when you do a spontaneous rant on a topic. You start in one place, you end up in another place. And I think it's good for the soul, particularly if you're articulating truth and you're not just blowing off steam, like complaining and having a gripe and a groan and a moan, which we all like to do. We all like to have a moan. It's very fun. It's very entertaining. And it feels good. But practicing telling the truth and describing how things are in your own unique way, because nobody has the exact data points that you have amassed over your lifetime. Nobody is you. Nobody has your voice, your specific turn of phrase, your unique combination of life experience and information gleaned, and accent and vocabulary and grammatical habits, right? You are a unique expression that is valuable, regardless of subscribers and followers and likes and all that bullshit. You've got a God-given voice and a unique soul and spirit, and you can speak truth out into the world like no one else on the planet can. And every single one of us has that power. And so I encourage you to use it. And that's going to be the end of my little preamble ramble intro, and we're going to jump into the book very soon. So good evening to Turbs and Frank and Lisa and David and Lee and Adam and Mongolian QWERTY 123 and Tammy. I think maybe I just said Tammy twice. I'm not sure. Double welcome to you if I did say your name twice. Adam says news. No, sorry. Lee says news. Northeast, west, south. NEWS. Propaganda from every direction. Yes, that's a good one. I like that. Adam says those people don't think they are the bad guys. These books being available is fine because it's a good thing in their eyes. Right. There's something about telling people what you're going to do to them first, and then when they let you do it, it's their fault. If I come up to you and say, I'm going to slap you and steal your wallet, and you don't do anything about it, you don't get out of the way when I raise my hand, and you don't, and you don't sort of move your wallet to a safe place, and I manage to pickpocket it, it's kind of on you, right? I told you I was going to do it, and you let me do it, so it's your fault. There's a little bit of that in there as well. Mongolian QWERTY says, McLuhan said, the internet was an extension of the human nervous system, increasing sensitivity to each other through constant contact and stimulation. Did he? Was that in The Media is the Message book? I don't even know what it's called. Understanding Media. That's what it's called. That makes sense. Because as strange as it may sound, I've definitely had experiences where I've connected and been affected by people, even though we're just on opposite ends of a Zoom call. And so I believe that 100% because I've felt it, I've experienced it. You can have this synergistic shared consciousness experience with other people in other places by being able to connect over a video or audio call. It's quite amazing when it happens. And it's the kind of thing that we try to create in book club on Tuesday nights when we get together for the discussions, right? We try to create this atmosphere of mutual learning and sharing and understanding to reflect on what we've previously read and to contribute and learn and uplift everybody's awareness of the subject and the material being studied. And it's a blessing to have the technology available to do that. Long may it continue. I hope we don't have to scan our fingerprints and eyeballs to use it anytime soon. Tammy says, I rant out loud. The phone and my light bulbs are probably listening. Only if you got smart light bulbs. But yeah, at this stage, whatever you have that's electronic in your house is probably listening. So that's probably most things. But again, it's good to get it out and speak it into the world regardless of who's listening. And actually, that might be your audience, GCHQ and MI6 and MI5 and whoever else has tapped into the many, many microphones that we are surrounded by. You can rant to them. You might change their minds. You might change the AI who is monitoring and hoovering up all your audio. You might feed some good logic and good sense into that strange non-entity, fake, intelligent creature, if it is a creature. And you could have a positive effect there, right? You never know. You don't know how these things reverberate out. But whatever you do gets recorded in the fabric of space-time, because history is made. It's not, history is written by the victors, right? We know that. So I'm not talking about history books and the formal histories that we learn in our various government indoctrination centers. What I'm talking about is actual history. What really happened? What has come before and led up to the present moment? Because there is a true record of what has happened out there somewhere. There has to be. It exists because it happened. It's truth. Truth is whatever happened and has happened up to this point and is happening right now. That is truth, like reality. So even if no one else knows, what you did or you didn't do. You've got that. And it's embedded and written into reality. I don't know exactly how that works or where that record is kept, but if it happened, by definition, it's true and it's embedded into reality in some way. And that's why I think every single act of saying the truth, speaking the truth, sharing it, standing up for the truth, correcting a wrong or a lie, it matters regardless of the size of the audience that's around to witness it or hear it. So I hope that makes sense. Frank says, audio and video beginning to marginally run out of sync again. Try refreshing it on your side. Is anyone else having that problem? If so, please let me know. But there's been an occasion recently, I think, Frank, where you were having an issue that other people weren't. So try reloading, rebooting the browser, clearing your browser memory, that sort of thing. The usual fixes. Try turning it off and on again. That's the classic IT fix, isn't it? So we're going to get into the reading tonight. We've got a really interesting section coming up. I'm excited to read this one. It's a question. I'll do a little. The end of liberal democracy? I'm really excited to read this bit. We're given this thing called politics, and we're given this thing called the vote. And people will tell you it's so important. And every time this new opportunity to vote comes around, pretty much every 4 years, we're often told this is the most important vote of our lifetimes. How many times have you heard that in your lifetime, right? And when you've been around that carousel a few times and you're starting to get a little dizzy and you realize that it's going nowhere because the same scenery keeps going past. Hang on a sec. That's the same cotton candy stand that I've been past 6 times now. And when you're on the carousel and the merry-go-round for so long, and you decide to get off and stand back and just watch the carousel go round and round, and you see people on it and they're still on it going, this is the most important vote of our lifetime. It's quite a strange place to be, because by definition, you're sort of alienated from the people who are still on it and still enjoying the ride. And still being taken for a ride, and all sorts of metaphors and allegorical language that go along with that, right? But even to this day, people think that this system, this voting system for the blue or the red team, it means that we have freedom, and it is mind blowing, and it's extra mind blowing if we have here in 1970, Zbigniew Brzezinski telling us that this system is either at an end or coming to an end. I don't know what the contents of this section are. I'm just riffing off what it's the title here. The end of liberal democracy. In 1970, he's asking this question. So I presume he's going to say either it's over, it's coming to an end, or it's very likely to come to an end if ... happens. And yet we still are surrounded by people who believe in this. And then the other thing is that even if people don't believe in it, even if the number of people participating drops, which I think it has been doing fairly steadily, the mainstream and the system continues regardless. So I feel like even if nobody showed up to put their little X in a box, they would just still say, well, and this person was elected, and what a landslide victory, and now they come in and they'll do their thing, right, for another 4 years, and they'll just put some gaffer tape over the cracks and move the deck chairs around on the sinking ship, and just hope that in the film Titanic, where the two halves of the ship finally snap, they just hope that doesn't happen in their term, and that they can get to the end of their little section in power, and hope the worst things, and maybe set a few landmines or a few hand grenades, a few traps to spring when the next group get back in. But even, I don't even think that really happens so much, because it's just the same group, really. It's the same group. It's the same class of people on both sides of the political aisle, blue team, red team. And they show up and they make this big show, song and dance about arguing on various topics. And that gets filmed and put on the internet. And it's like, look, see, liberal democracy, what a great system we have. When really they're just a class of parasitical, script-reading puppets who serve the true owners of the system and the society and the country. And who are the true owners? Great question. I don't feel like it's anybody whose names we know. I think it's probably people who work in high finance. It could be people who are above and beyond the royal family. Maybe people who might even be seen to be poking members of the royal family in the chest, as though they're giving them orders and telling them what to do, right? So this is really just a smoke screen, puppet show, shadows on the cave wall type of performance that is put out there to entertain the public, for the public to waste time on, to kill time on. And when you're trying to make that point to people, it would be a lot more powerful if you can say, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, wrote that down in his 1970 book. That will back up your argument. That will make your argument a lot stronger. And hopefully, if people are engaging with you in good faith, they'll say, what? Really? It was written in a 1970 book by a presidential advisor? Yes. Oh, wow. Okay, I got to check that out. Let me find a PDF copy and confirm. Right? It's about having some evidence to bring to the table and not sounding like a total crackpot lunatic with lots of theories and ideas that are unsubstantiated and not backed up by anything tangible. So I'm really excited to get into this section tonight. Frank has fixed his audio-visual lagging problem, which is good. So I think we'll take that as a sign that it is about ready. It is about right to get into the book. So let's do that right now. If at all you enjoy the stream and want to support, please remember that you can do so at allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. It's right there on the bottom of the screen. Everything you need is right there. Everything you need to support the show, that is. So yeah, your support is greatly appreciated. It goes a long way. It helps me to pay the bills and buy the food and pay for the internet and the electricity and all the other stuff that we got to pay for. Things ain't getting cheaper, that's for sure. But we do what we can as long as we can. So let's get into the book tonight. This is Zbigniew Brzezinski. We're reading from Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. And this is part 4 of the book, The American Transition. And the section we're going to be reading tonight is The End of Liberal Democracy. Let me get my pencil. Right. The End of Liberal Democracy. A technologically innovative and particularly conservative phase that would lead to some form of technological managerialism is only one possibility. So technological managerialism, I'd say that's pretty much where we are, isn't it? Other alternatives could be more extreme. Oh, right. So maybe he's gonna make the reader wish, hope, and pray for technological managerialism, because it's the best of a bad bunch. It's the lesser of two evils, just like you get to choose between every time you go in to do your voting. American socioeconomic tensions could be aggravated by the loss of momentum in economic growth and therefore in the pace of scientific research and technological development, an important source of national pride. Racial strife, urban guerrilla activity, and alienation of the young, in addition to a profound national split over America's global role, could result in a further breakdown of national consensus and lead either the extreme left or the extreme right to capitalize on America's political disintegration by attempting to seize power. It's refreshing, actually, to see somebody talking about the extreme left, because these days the extreme left is not even acknowledged. It's not even a real thing. It's not possible for the left to become extremist in a lot of the university teachings and the social justice warrior, woke, left-leaning type of ideology that is pushed, and the talking heads who advance that agenda. They never really seem to acknowledge it. It's not a thing. And then it's part of the dialectic, because then you get the right-wing talking heads popping up, and even though they're not really right-wing, but they're just pointing out that, hang on, this left thing might have gone a bit too far. So it's kind of refreshing that he's saying there's an extreme left, there's an extreme right, and either one of those could attempt to seize power in the event of some sort of disintegration. But back to the text and continuing. On balance, the chances for the success of a serious revolutionary attempt do not appear to be very good. To become an effective revolutionary instrument, the present new left would have not only to relate more meaningfully to the new issues confronting our times, but also to develop the techniques, the skills, and the organizational forms required to effect a revolution in the world's most modern, technologically advanced society. This would require the transformation of a somewhat petulant middle-class youth movement, supported from a safe distance by some sectors of the more esoteric urban intellectual community, into an organization with a systematic theory of action that takes into account the specificity of contemporary America. SDS worship of Che Guevara, a tragic rural rebel, and its growing reliance on turgid Marxist-Leninist phraseology may be a compensation for its inability to make that adaptation, but it hardly augurs its emergence as an effective revolutionary force. Excuse me, I had to sneeze there. Continuing. There is a significant difference between revolutionary activity and revolutionary success. Revolutionary activity through terrorism, sabotage, assassinations, urban guerrilla strife is possible and even likely in the early 1970s. It will come not from the new left, but from its emerging successor, the professionally violent left. Not from the idealistic young people who infuse it with zeal and confusion, but from those among them who have been hardened, disillusioned, and embittered by their experiences in prisons and penitentiaries. These men will be psychologically prepared for real violence, and they will dismiss as child's play the sit-downs and the raids on dean's offices. American society would then have to confront a major internal threat. Just give me a second, I gotta blow my nose. I don't know why, it's been dry all day. And then I start live streaming. I think it's all the electronics. But there's a nasty super flu going around at the minute here in the UK. We've shut down some schools and the hospitals are overloaded and the NHS is, in crisis. So we have to be careful. All right. So yeah, this is quite a grim prediction that he's making here, isn't it? These embattled, embittered men coming out of prisons and penitentiaries and getting ready to cause some real revolutionary activity. Because earlier in the book, he's talked quite extensively about student movements and their sort of infantile play acting at being revolutionaries, and they're really, he says that they were from the middle class and they're supported by their parents, and very reminiscent of the modern day and the protests that go on at university campuses and BLM type things and the riots that start and were supported and created and enhanced by various groups. So it's amazing how much this book sounds like it could have been written in the present day. But back to the text. But even then, the collective weight of political and social institutions, as well as the coercive might of organized authority, would in all probability prevail, as long as the new left remains largely ineffective in its sporadic reliance on violence. It will be spared. Should it become the violent left, suppression would be its almost certain fate. Well, he's wrong there, isn't he? Because when these BLM riots all got out of hand and shops were being smashed up, cars set on fire and bricks thrown through windows and all that stuff, they weren't suppressed, really. They were protected. They were celebrated by the mainstream media. They were enhanced. They had these little autonomous zones in various cities and places throughout the US, didn't they? So it's very strange, and a lot of the mainstream talking heads would often tell us that the threat comes from the extreme right, the right wing. That's where the real threat is. Even as these left-leaning, indoctrinated students were smashing places up and causing actual damage. So, bit of double think there for you. Continuing, the fact is that revolutions are historical rarities, and in modern times their successes generally require a combination of internal social dissolution and external military defeat. The organization of power must itself break down. The elite must be split. The socio-economic system must malfunction. An alternative leadership must crystallize, and the more creative social forces must be, at least in significant part, convinced that a better alternative is available. Short of these conditions, reliance on revolutionary violence is likely to breed suppression, and even effectively brutal suppression. There's a little footnote here. On this point, there is agreement among such dissimilar observers as the National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence and Barrington Moore, a severe critic of the present American system. The commission concluded that, quote, collective violence seldom succeeds as an instrument for accomplishing group objectives. It can succeed when one group so overpowers its opponents that they have no choice but to die or desist. But modern governments are much more likely to succeed in such contests than their opponents. Well, yeah, the modern governments have access to a lot of toys that their opponents, i.e. the public, do not have. And that it's a little more even, the playing field over in the States. Here in England, it's, yeah, we've got sticks, and they've got military grade weaponry. So that's why, when you've got such a strong monopoly on violence and advanced weaponry, then revolutionary violence is never going to work. Continuing with this footnote, there's a quote. In the contemporary United States, attempts at revolution from the left are likely to invite massive repression from the right. The occurrence of violence in the context of protest activities is highly likely to alienate groups that are not fundamentally in sympathy with the protesters. The chronicles of American labor conflicts suggest that violence, when it occurred, was almost always ineffective for the workers involved. The more violent the conflict, the more disastrous the consequences for the workers. That's from the New York Times. Very much in the same vein, Moore warned that the prospects for an urban revolution in America are very dim, and that successful radical revolutions have so far failed to provide, quote, a lasting contribution to human freedom. That's what he's not talking about there is like agent provocateurs. A lot of protests and organized demonstrations and marches and these sorts of events are infiltrated, and police go undercover, or other people from various elements of the government, stooges and bullies and lackeys that call themselves law enforcement. They'll go in there undercover and they'll stir up violence. They'll start the violence, and then they know that once that violence starts, they can paint the movement as a bunch of thugs on the mainstream media, and then the public won't support them because of all the violence that erupted and the violence that was caused. And it will disempower, it will not disempower, but it will bring the movement into disrepute, and they'll get less support and less leeway from the public. And it's a way to destabilize and suppress these kinds of movements. So that's another aspect as well. It's not just that the left or the right are using violence. They probably realize that they've got no hope of violence against the state. So, for example, when I was going to lockdown protests, everyone on the megaphones was shouting, "Keep it peaceful," and "We're just here peacefully marching," and no violence and all this. That was the main messaging. And I think it's probably a similar case for all the digital ID protests and marches that are happening at the moment. There's another one coming up fairly soon, probably this weekend or next weekend. And but the state knows this, and the state knows that they have an advantage if violence does start, because that gives them an opportunity to go in with their dogs and their riot shields and their horses and weaponry and gadgets and gizmos and facial recognition and pepper spray and water cannons and all this rubber bullets and whatever it is that they use, right? But they can't use that first. So peaceful demonstrations, all well and good, but how do you stop them being infiltrated? How do you stop people stirring up trouble and getting the whole thing derailed? That's another thing entirely. Let's go back to the text then. Top of page 250 here. The suppression of the violent left would almost certainly push the country to the right. Organized coercion would require the introduction of a variety of controls over the individual. Okay. Organized coercion would require the introductions of a variety of controls over the individual. If undertaken systematically by the legitimate institutions, the process would in all probability strengthen the conservative political forces. If undertaken ineffectively, it would probably prompt right-wing vigilantism based on a variety of paramilitary formations. But even then, a right extremist coup seems most unlikely. Such a coup would require the development of a degree of organizational cohesion and conceptual relevance that seems beyond the capability of the extreme rightists, most of whom have been left behind by the pace of American change. Well, my comment on that would be that it's done on purpose, because these groups, particularly I imagine in America, the ones that have the guns, the right-leaning sort of pro-gun people, they're not going to take any risks at that group getting organized. So there's going to be divide and conquer and Pied Pipers and infiltrators and people who are sent in to sow discord and derail any kind of attempt at organizing those people. I don't think that would ever be allowed to happen. So I don't think it's a fault of the extreme rightists. I mean, he's calling them the extreme rightists. I don't think it's a fault of the rightists that they can't organize. It's just that they're up against tactics of divide and conquer, which Zbigniew is not really acknowledging or talking about or letting on that he's aware of. Maybe he's not aware of them, but I think that's part that explains it, rather than this group just can't organize themselves. So back to the text. The more likely probability then is that sporadic civil strife would lead to a polarization of public opinion, with the Democratic Party gradually becoming identified with some of the less extreme New Left positions and or splitting, and the Republican Party striving to exploit this situation and to consolidate a national conservative majority. This could come about gradually. The more adventuresome aspects of the American dream would be preempted by the more conservative leaders. For example, Spiro Agnew's call for a mission to Mars. While lower middle class America's disillusionment with liberalism, resentment of the New Left, and fear of the blacks would prompt such an extreme concentration on order that concern with progress in race relations would become merely window dressing and eventually fade from the public agenda. The emergence of a more reactionary political response would neither be dramatic nor have the overt overtones of fascism. This process could be accelerated by the doctrinaire liberals' determination either to remold the Democratic Party in their own image or to create their own political party. The insistence on a doctrinaire response to complexity and the impatience with more generalized compromises are characteristic social manifestations in time of historical discontinuity. As has been already noted, they are particularly representative of the young and of marginal members of society. The political consequence would be an even greater squeeze on the pragmatic, less ideological liberals, pressed from one side by the doctrinarians advocating large-scale social engineering, and opting out of external challenges, and from the other by the conservatives preaching the merits of social consolidation and of new scientific frontiers. The latent anti-intellectualism of a great many Americans, intensified by college disorders, aggravated by the ambivalence of the intellectuals, and sharpened by class hostility toward the rebellious offspring of middle-class America, could also undermine public support for the country's educational institutions, thus matching the perilous challenge from the left with an equally perilous challenge from the right. The American university would become politicized, either constantly agitated over non-academic issues, with its faculties and students passing resolutions on all sorts of extraneous matters and increasingly injecting political criteria into their intellectual pursuits, or subject to stricter outside controls by conservative assemblies and trustees who would impose their political biases on the internal workings of academia. The resulting destruction of the liberal university would itself be a grave symptom of the decline of American liberal democracy. Okay, so this bit about universities becoming politicized, well, that certainly happened, didn't it? You only need to listen to somebody like James Lindsay or who else? Who else goes on about this? Brett Weinstein? I never know which way he says it. chased off campus, hunted down by a group of students, and who were calling for him his head on a pike, something like that. They've talked about how the American university has become politicized. So it's pretty amazing that Zbigniew was saying this could happen back in the 70s. But this being, what's the important point here is that he calls it a grave symptom of the decline of American liberal democracy. I don't think in this day and age, universities are really... I wouldn't encourage young people to go there unless you want to be like a dentist. If there's some profession on the other side of it that you want to get into that requires the degree to get into it, fine, different matter. But if you're just going there because you got nothing better to do, because you want to have that extended adolescence, have that experience of not having to provide for yourself or work or earn money or pay your own bills, just jerk off for an extra 3 years with no plan or reason or purpose that comes after that, then I would advise people not to do it. I would say you'd be way further ahead of people your age if you go and work for 3 years, learn some discipline, some skills, learn some real life experience in the workplace. You're going to be miles ahead, and you're not going to be in debt, and you're going to have some savings, and you're going to have some money, some contacts that you can build on, and you'll just be more mature and more advanced than other people. So I think he's, again, quite prescient in his recognition that the American universities are going to become politicized and destroyed. He uses the word destruction here. And that this is what contributes to the fall of liberal democracy. There's a couple of footnotes here, so we'll have a look at these. The first one says, examples of this are provided by the Columbia University Senate's first major act in 1969, which was to express its judgment on the Vietnam War, and by the objections of UCLA's trustees to a young black philosophy professor because of her political associations. And then the second footnote says, the long-range consequences of the attack on the universities appear to be of little concern to the New Left. For example, the demand for the separation of defense research from universities could create a separate complex of government-operated military research institutes whose secrecy would shield their operations from outside intellectual influence, as is true in the Soviet Union. This is precisely what has already happened in the case of bacteriological warfare devices, which were developed in closed governmental research laboratories far removed from the overview of the scientific community. The removal of ROTC could similarly accelerate rather than slow down the emergence of a separate large professional career officer corps. In other words, a warrior caste. That was one of the more fascinating and interesting footnotes. So, firstly, the bacteriological research being totally separated from mainstream academia and science. There's no reference for that, but you can believe it. Closed governmental research laboratories. And then also the warrior caste, right? You have this like modern day caste system, which is the people at the top of the very top of the pile, whose names we don't know. Then they're sort of servants and representatives and bureaucratic lackeys in the next layer down. They're the ones we do see and we are aware of and we know their names and we throw tomatoes at them, as Alan Watt would say. And then underneath that's everybody else, and it's kind of the pyramid structure. And the real powerful, power-hungry controllers, world controllers, as you might call them, they're insulated by virtue of this complete shield of bureaucrats and bureaucracies and forms and increasingly AI programs and digitally mediated interactions with the institutions that govern and rule and control our lives. They're very well insulated at this point. So just that the mention of a warrior caste is just a kind of little nod, a little tip of the hat, a little acknowledgement of the true nature of the system that we're in. It is a kind of caste system. This is why the same bloodlines produce all the actors, and these bloodlines produce all the scientists, and these other bloodlines produce all the politicians, and these other bloodlines produce all the, fill in the gap, whatever elite expert sort of authority that is needed. They tend to come from the same families over and over again down through history. I've mentioned a couple of books before that show this and explain it, but it is a caste system in that sense. So yeah, really interesting footnote there. Glad we read that one. Back to the book. In such a context, the already staggering task of creating an equitable multiracial society could become hopeless. I can't believe he said that. Present trends augur a worsening crisis unless a major social effort at amelioration is promptly undertaken. Assuming public indifference, or even worse, public hostility towards such efforts, there are two equally horrendous prospects for white-black relations in America: suppression of the blacks and/or their separation. Either one could be undertaken only in the context of a more... Oh, hang on. So the two... Right, I misread that. There's two horrendous prospects. One is suppression of the blacks, and the other one is the separation of the blacks from the whites. That's the only two options. Because remember, whites can never be suppressed. Whites can never be the victims of racism. And in fact, I was reading in, this blew my mind, I think I mentioned it last week, but in part 3 of The Blackening of Europe by Claire Ellis, white Europeans are not considered indigenous, technically are not considered indigenous by the UN or the EU. Like the label of indigenous peoples only applies, according to their definitions, to people who have been displaced and turned into a minority by an invading or an immigrating population. So this is why, like, the Native Americans, they're indigenous, or the Aborigines in Australia, they're indigenous. But so long as you are the majority in your country, you're not indigenous. You only become indigenous once you become a minority in your country. This is like, and this is how the Native Europeans have no rights. They don't have the rights that indigenous peoples have in countries such as Canada, USA, and Australia. Very clever, that, isn't it? Very, very legalistic and very creepy and weird. So something to bear in mind. And that book, I'm trying to pull it out there, but it's in the stack of other books. That book is really good. I know Frank's got his copies. And if you haven't got yours yet, here's your reminder to grab Claire Ellis's trilogy, The Blackening of Europe. They're all good. I couldn't tell you, if you're only going to get one, which one to get. I'd get all of them. Anyway, that I thought was worth mentioning, because even back in the 70s, it was the same sort of case that you can't, the whites will never be suppressed and the whites can't separate, right? Because that's racist, obviously. Continuing. So he's saying that these are the two terrible prospects for white-black relations: the suppression of the blacks and the separation of the blacks. These are horrendous. Continue. So back to the text. Either one could be undertaken only in the context of a more reactionary political atmosphere, and would itself generate overwhelming pressures toward reaction. Suppression, including efforts at some form of separate resettlement, would involve major strife, for the American black is no longer pliant, and moreover, many whites would flock to his side. Though suppression could effectively be undertaken, especially in the wake of massive black uprisings prompted by desperation at the absence of progress, the price paid would be a tragic reversal of the process by which the scope of American democracy has deepened and enlarged over the course of the country's history. So, what we're reading, or what I was thinking of when I was just going through that section there, is this guy's really not making predictions and trying to read the tea leaves and find out what's gonna and figure out what's gonna happen in the future using his analysis and his noggin and his logic and his evidence. I think even though it's presented in those terms, I think it's more accurate to think of this as like, here's the options that we've got. For the social engineers, for the world controllers, for the people who manipulate and steer the masses and they control public opinion, as Edward Bernays admitted in his book Propaganda, the ones who play the divide and conquer and the just ad nauseum, they got to strategize. They got to war game. They've got to work through all the different scenarios and then pick one and then work to make that manifest. And this is why the world controllers are so successful, is because this is what they do. And they don't give up, and they cooperate, and they work together relentlessly, tirelessly, ceaselessly. They don't kill time. They don't waste time. They war game. They strategize. They think. They analyze. They gather data. They plan scenarios and situations. They run tests, right? They are constantly thinking about what's next, what's our target, what are the situations that we can manipulate and manifest by using the resources and the powers at our disposal, whether that's manipulation of public opinion through media or spraying some calming sedative type chemical from the sky to quell tensions, or dropping off pallets of bricks next to a university that's about to erupt in protests. All of these things, or using the agent provocateurs to turn a peaceful protest, march, and demonstration into something violent, right? All of these are tactics and strategies and methodologies the ruling elite use against the rest of us. And so when he's saying it could go this way, it could go that way, I feel like he's more saying, here's the options that we've got. This is how each one of those scenarios plays out. And which one should we go with? Which one do you want us to run with? It's Alan Watt would often say, we're living through a business plan. And if you're in any kind of corporation and you're higher up at all and you have access to these kinds of strategy meetings where people sit down and they look at the numbers and they see the utilization and they get the spreadsheet up, because everything's done in spreadsheets in the modern day, and they strategize. How many people we're going to hire? How many people we got to get rid of? Who can have a pay rise? Who can have a promotion? If we promote that guy, then can we get them into this role and give him these responsibilities? And who's going to go above and beyond and do extra work in the evenings and the weekends? And who's not putting any of that extra time in? And where's the work, right? Where is the money coming from? Which sectors can we expand into? It's all strategy. It's all scenarios. It's all analysis. It's very cold and calculating. I feel like, and I've said it before in this series, but I feel like that's what he's doing to society, to groups, to cultures, to religions, to socioeconomic class divides, to income levels, to racial backgrounds. You know, it's all pieces on the chessboard, the grand chessboard, you might say. And to them, it's like strategizing. How do we win this game? By manipulating and moving the pieces that we have available to us. And that's kind of amazing to me that this could be written down in such a calculating, dispassionate way when you're talking about violence between groups of people and you're talking about revolutionary activities and possibly death and destruction and mayhem and all these other things. It's quite amazing. But we'll continue with the book. Another threat, less overt but no less basic, confronts liberal democracy. More directly linked to the impact of technology, it involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled and directed society. Okay, here we go. So more directly linked to the impact of technology, it involves the gradual appearance, just appeared, poof, like that, just appeared, poof. A more controlled and directed society, poof. Well, where did that come from? It just appeared. I love it. I love the language. Continuing, such a society would be dominated by an elite whose claim to political power would rest on allegedly superior scientific know-how. Okay. Allegedly. I mean, he's just admitted in that footnote that there is this whole avenue of research that is hidden and separated from the mainstream scientific community, right? And now he's like, well, allegedly superior scientific know-how, you know. Unhindered by the restraints of traditional liberal values, this elite would not hesitate to achieve its political ends by using the latest modern techniques for influencing public behavior and keeping society under close surveillance and control. Under such circumstances, the scientific and technological momentum of the country would not be reversed, but would actually feed on the situation it exploits. Page 253 there, everybody. That is a bit of a bombshell, a bit of a smoking gun right there. And dominated by an elite with superior scientific know-how, with unhindered by the restraints. I can't say restraints today. I keep putting a shut in there. Restraints. I just turn into Sean Connery when I say that word. Unhindered by the restraints. They will influence public behavior and keep society under close surveillance and control. So there you go. He says, continuing, the emergence of a large dominant party, alongside the more narrowly focused and more intensely doctrinaire groupings on the right and the left, could accelerate the trend toward such technological managerialism. It could accelerate the trend. So that's what I mean about him giving scenarios. He's like, well, you know, we could have the blacks being suppressed. Oh, we could have them separating from the whites and just bring back that segregation thing, or we could just use superior scientific know-how that's being worked on and developed in these government labs that are separate from the mainstream scientific academia and community, and we could surveil everyone and control everybody and accelerate the trend toward technological managerialism. That's just one scenario. You know, it's just a possibility. Continuing, such a large dominant party would combine American society's quest for stability with its historical affinity for innovation. Relying on scientific growth to produce the means for dealing with social ills, it would tap the nation's intellectual talent for broad target planning and exploit the existence of doctrinaire groups by using them as social barometers and as sources of novel ideas. So there you are. When you join a group, you're being tapped for novel ideas and data gathering, basically. When he says social barometers, when you've got a group that represents a certain ideology or a certain movement, and you know, the numbers in that group reflect how popular that ideology or that movement is. So it's just data gathering. This is why there's always a group available for you to join, because as soon as you join it, as soon as you pay your dues and you become a card-carrying member and you slap that sticker on your car, boom, they know they know exactly where you're at, up here in your mind, here in your heart, and probably down there in your guts as well. They know how you're going to behave. They know what sort of movements, activities, and behaviors you are going to put your will behind, right? It's a tell. You're just giving your cards away. You're just saying, these are the cards that I have in my hand. Have a look at them, because I'm a ... You know, I'm a member of ... group, society, party, team, whatever it is. I think this might be part of why Alan Watt always cautioned so heavily against joining any kind of group. Unless it's a book club, in which case you should definitely consider joining it, because who wouldn't want to hang out with like-minded people and talk about very interesting books all the time? It's the only... And that exception is not endorsed by Alan Watt, I have to say. I just added that myself. But yes, so if you join a group, you're a social barometer and a source of novel ideas. They'll take your ideas and concepts, and if they're useful, they'll be monitoring, surveilling, they'll be gathering that data of all these groups. And if some useful concept or idea pops up in there, they'll take it. They'll take it and use it for themselves. Of course they will. Continuing, it says, persisting social crisis, the emergence of a charismatic personality, so that's your Trump, and the exploitation of mass media to obtain public confidence would be the stepping stones in the piecemeal transformation of the United States into a highly controlled society. Page 253, ladies and gentlemen. That is a very important one. We've got a footnote down here as well. This could also produce a historical paradox. The traditionally democratic American society could, because of its fascination with technical efficiency, become an extremely controlled society, and its humane and individualistic qualities would thereby be lost. Such a society is the subject of Kurt Vonnegut's novel, Player Piano. I haven't read that, I have to admit. I have got quite a few Vonnegut novels. I've got 3 or 4, but I haven't read that one. I might have to get it. He says, on the other hand, the communist countries, because of their organizational inefficiency and the gradual loosening of political controls, might become more preoccupied with questions of humanism. Their socialist inefficiency, combined with these more humane concerns, could eventually produce a more flexible social order in some of them. It should, however, be noted that this extremely unlikely prospect is applicable only to the more advanced communist countries. The weight of the political tradition and great power aspirations of the Russian form of communism, as well as the relative socio-economic backwardness of most communist states, argue against it. For a critique of the concept of convergence, i.e., the evolution of a communist system into a traditional liberal democracy, see the concluding chapter of the book I wrote with Samuel Huntington, Political Power, USA, USSR, New York, 1964. So they were trying to, in that book, it sounds like, I haven't read it, but it sounds like they were trying to poo-poo this idea of convergence, turn people off that, these systems aren't going to merge, they're not going to evolve to a third system with the combining of the two. But we have this book here, which we're going to read next on the channel, Foundations, Their Power and Influence, which says otherwise, and that's 1958, right? So that was out, published. This information was available prior to Zbigniew writing Between Two Ages, and he doesn't reference it. He doesn't talk about it, and perhaps that is part of the reason why he was brought on board to set up the Trilateral Commission and be one of the main voices describing the way things are going to be in America and other places. If the plan was always to merge the two systems, the East and the West, to create this third way system, you might want to hide that plan. And so you can get your academics such as Samuel Huntington and Zbigniew to write a whole book in the 60s about critiquing convergence, the concept of convergence. But yeah, quite an interesting page there. And concluding part 4 of the book. In different ways, both the doctrinarian and the conservative might find the temptations inherent in the new techniques of social control too difficult to resist. The inclination of the doctrinaire left to legitimize means by ends could lead them to justify more social control on the ground that it serves progress. The conservatives, preoccupied with public order and fascinated by modern gadgetry, would be tempted to use the new techniques as a response to unrest, since they would fail to recognize that social control is not the only way to deal with rapid social change. Such an outcome, were it to come to pass, would represent a profoundly pessimistic answer to the question whether American liberal democracy can assimilate and give philosophical meaning to the revolution it is undergoing. This matter not only has relevance for the United States, it has larger implications. American success or failure may provide a significant indication whether a modern democracy with highly educated citizens can successfully undergo an extensive social change without losing its essentially democratic character. Fortunately, the American transition also contains the potential for an American redemption. That is the end of part 4, the American transition. So quite amazing to read it with the benefit of hindsight from this vantage point here in 2025, I think. The controls that have been brought in, the surveillance that he talked about, the technological nudging and steering of people's minds and consciousness and awareness to focus on the topics and the subjects and the events that are expedient to the ruling classes, right? That has all come to pass. I mean, he told us in either the last reading or the one before that there was going to be this system which would collect and aggregate all the country's information and put it into one place. He told us the internet was coming in this book in the 1970s. And he sort of predicts that, maybe this will lead to a scientifically dominant minority controlling society through their scientific know-how. Quite an amazing chapter we just read there. I thought that was one of the most revealing sections that we've read of the book so far. So that was very good stuff indeed. We'll have a little look at the chats and the messages over on YouTube. Let's see, we'll go back a bit. So Mongolian QWERTY says, James Burnham wrote The Managerial Revolution in 1941, explaining capitalism wasn't being replaced by socialism as often thought, but by a new class of managers of society. I need to get myself a copy of that book. I've looked for the first edition copies and they are expensive. So maybe I just need to settle for a paperback reprint. Sadly, I'm not wealthy enough to buy some of these first edition older copies, but I have heard of it before and I appreciate the reminder. I got to get that for sure. Frank says, Mission to Mars, Musk the new Agnew then. Musk, master of the dark enlightenment. Yeah, the Mission to Mars thing, right? That's a dream that keeps getting trotted out there. We can all go to Mars, and popularized by the film with Matt Damon. It was a book first, but it's called The Martian. And that is a sort of scientific, atheist, science-worshipping, white lab coat priest fawning dream. that is a real materialist piece of propaganda for sure. And it is very entertaining, but that is preparing people's minds to accept this narrative, just like our minds were prepared to accept the moon landing. They're doing the same thing with the mission to Mars now. And what will actually happen when that mission, if we are ever told that it is underway and we're shown footage, maybe that'll be the next moon landing. We'll be shown a lot of footage of people climbing onto some sort of craft and it'll take off and we'll be told that they've gone to Mars and actually they've just gone to the desert, or I don't know, somewhere, maybe the hole in the southern pole to the inside of the Earth, because we all know the Earth is hollow. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? But that could be the next sort of big spectacle that they roll out and con us with, maybe. Joe says, James Goldsmith, who wrote The Trap, said that university is the single biggest handicap a person can have in life. It takes 10 years for the brainwashing to wear off, if it ever does. Wow. That's the single biggest handicap. It is certainly a continuation of primary school and secondary school. I don't know if it's worse than those. I mean, if you were homeschooled up to the age of 18 and then decided to go to university, it probably wouldn't be as bad as a handicap. It probably wouldn't be as bad as if you'd been through government schooling, primary, secondary, college, and then went to university, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure about that, but thanks for the mention, James Goldsmith. I just looked up Sir James Goldsmith, the first US edition of his book, The Trap, and the hardcover is £129.71 on Amazon. But you can get a used copy for £40 if you want to get hold of that. James Goldsmith, The Trap. I hadn't heard of that book before, or that author, so thanks for the recommendation. Lisa says Sean Connery was her favourite Bond. Of course, he was everyone's favourite Bond, wasn't he? It reminds me of a joke I learned from my brother. It goes like this: knock, knock. I'm not going to sit here until somebody says who's there in the chat, because there's a bit of a lag, so I'll just give you the next line. Knock, knock. Who's there? Dishes. Dishes who? Dishes Sean Connery. And it's a pretty good one, actually. It is the season for cringy Christmas cracker dad jokes, and there you go. That's one that you can put in your back pocket, and you can whip it out at the Christmas table and outshine all of those terrible cracker jokes that people will be reading to each other. So, another interesting section of the book, I think you'll agree. And we're heading next into the fifth and final part of the book, which seems hard to believe. I feel like we've been reading this forever because I keep interrupting the reading and going off on tangents. But this section is going to be called America and the World. You can see there. And we've got the American future is the first part, participatory pluralism, change in cultural formation, rational humanism. I'm getting Huxley vibes from that. Then international prospects, the revolutionary process, USA and USSR, policy implications. The final section is a community of developed nations. Sounds a lot like the UN, but we probably won't get to that final section today. We're going to see how far we get, and then we'll wrap up whatever's left next Friday. But this is it. This is part 5, the final part of the book. So please remember, if you are moved at any point to support what I'm doing here and you're getting value from the broadcast, you can go to allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. Join the book club. We've got a nice study group going on there. And in the minute, I'll mention we are reading through Political Ponerology, the Science of Evil, Psychopathy, and the Origins of Totalitarianism. This is by Andrew Wobachewski. And when he says it's a science, he's not kidding. This is actually quite an academic book. There's a lot of new words and terms and concepts because, as he says at the beginning of the book, that he had to come up with this sort of objective language to use to describe the qualities, the conditions, the features and aspects of people that lead to the manifestation of evil in our communities, in our societies, in our countries, which can eventually take over. And as we saw in various dictatorships, totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, right? So he lived through Nazi Germany, then he lived through communist Poland, in Poland under communism. So he lived through Poland under Nazism, and then he was in Poland under communism. And he got to witness things firsthand, and he was carrying out this scientific study of evil as he was living through it. And he had to really hide this study that he was doing because books were getting burnt, and having this information and talking about the psychopathic traits and behaviors of people, the ruling people, the people in positions of authority, it was dangerous. It would get you killed. So he had to carry this study out in secrecy. He had to write it down in secrecy. The first version of the manuscript had to be thrown in a fire right before the place where he was working was raided. It then had to be smuggled out of the country. There's a whole backstory to it, which is fascinating. Zbigniew Brzezinski himself tried to suppress the publication of the book, right? If you remember, Zbigniew Brzezinski was apparently coined the term totalitarianism in his undergraduate studies, I think, or maybe his master's studies or something. Some academic thesis of his involved the study of totalitarianism, and yet he tried to have this book suppressed. Now, it's a very interesting read. There's a lot to talk about and think about and analyze, and it even helps you in your own personal life if you're dealing with people who have these kind of traits. Maybe it's a narcissist, maybe it's a sociopath, maybe it's a chronic liar, or someone who's manipulative, a colleague, a family member, a neighbor, who knows? It could be anybody, because psychopathy exists in all strata of society, and it can touch all our lives. And the main thesis of the book is that we have to study it, we have to know how to recognize it, and then we have to all be good at recognizing it and seeing it where it exists so that we can call it out and we can prevent those people from seeking out positions of power. Because the very high-functioning psychopaths, that's what they do. They go into corporations, they go into government, they work their way up, backstabbing, lying, deceit, deceiving, stepping on others, ruining reputations. They are master manipulators. They are actors. They are Oscar-winning actors because they can fake all the emotions, even though they don't feel them. There's no guilt, there's no compassion, there's no empathy. But they see other people's feelings and they can emulate it, turn on the tears at the right time, right? Pull on the heartstrings in the right moment. They know how to do that. Not all of them. Some of them end up in prison. Some of them are petty criminals and absolute failures. But the real high-functioning, high-intelligent psychopaths, they're the ones who get to the top of corporations. They're the ones who get to the top of political parties, of revolutionary movements. And then you end up with your Stalin, your Mao, your Hitler, your Rumsfeld, right? And so it's an amazing account of how that happens. It empowers you with information that you can use in your day-to-day life. So it's a great book. I'm really enjoying reading it. We've got a fantastic little study group meeting every Tuesday to discuss the previous reading. And if you're not interested in reading, you could join the community at the lower tier and just access the recordings of the readings and just get the information from the book and sort of chew on it and digest it at your own pace, at your own leisure. So that's another option as well. But political pornology, it's going on in the book club, and it's very good indeed. I recommend anyone who's interested in studying and reading with a group of like-minded people to consider joining up. That would be really good. And then you can send me an email, nick@hazereviews.com, if you want to get in touch for any reason, ask some questions, recommend a book, or just whatever, anything you want to get in touch with. I'm always happy to hear from people. And I think that's all I want to say for this little mid-show self-promotionary effort. So let's have a sip, and then we'll get back into the book and see how far we get before we call it a night. So this is part 5, America and the World. America's relationship with the world must reflect American domestic values and preoccupations. A profound discrepancy between the external conduct of a democratic society and its internal norms is no longer possible. Mass communications quickly expose the gulf and undercut the support needed for its foreign policy. Just as a nation preoccupied with the communist threat at home can conduct a vigorously anti-communist policy abroad, or a nation fearful of revolution can become intensely involved in counter-revolutionary activity, so a nation concerned with social justice and technological adaptation cannot help but become similarly committed on an international level. In his second treatise on government, John Locke wrote, quote, "In the beginning, all the world was America." Today, all the world is America, in the sense that America is the first to experience the social, psychological, political, and ideological dilemmas produced by man's sudden acquisition of altogether unprecedented power over his environment and over himself. The Third American Revolution, occurring in an era of volatile beliefs and of rapidly spreading technological change, thus clearly dictates America's role, that of the social innovator. Exploiting science in the service of man, but without dogmatically prescribing the destiny of man, the success of America in building a healthy democratic society would hold promise for a world still dominated by ideological and racial conflicts, by economic and social injustice. America's failure not only would be a setback for trends underway since the great revolutions of the late 18th century, but could signify a more fundamental human failure: man's inability to overcome his baser instincts and his capitulation before the complexity and power of science. So that's the introduction. This is part 5, chapter 1, The American Future. If the problems that confront America were neither recognized nor anticipated, the inherent dangers would be even greater. Such is not the case. Contemporary America is perhaps more candidly critical and more demanding of itself than any other society. National reports pinpointing the society's failures, devastating critiques of national shortcomings, elaborate efforts at social stocktaking all reflect a more introspective and deliberately sober national mood. Studies of the future, organized on a large scale both by special academic commissions and by well-endowed private institutes, indicate mounting national recognition that the future can and must be planned, that unless there is a modicum of deliberate choice, change will result in chaos. We have to plan the future. But who exactly is doing the planning? That's the question. There's a footnote. The concern is not limited to intellectuals, but includes businessmen as well. Thus, in March 1969, Fortune unveiled a plan to remedy the condition of a second-rate nation with a civilization only half built, offering a program for extensive rehabilitation of the nations. It would require massive public and private effort. So every time I see public and private, I always think of the public-private partnerships, which he did talk about earlier in the book, much earlier in the book. He says in the footnote, see also a more extensive study by Leonard A. Lecht called Goals, Priorities and Dollars, the Next Decade from 1966, which outlines in extraordinary detail a plan for allocating the GMP for various tasks of national renewal with special concentration on the scientific, technological and ecological structure of society. Yes, you got to get in that ecological angle of things, right? Back to the text. This does not guarantee that a national response will actually be mounted, but it does indicate a more pervasive awareness among leading sectors of society of the need for a deliberate response. The historical vitality of the United States system derives from the deeply rooted commitment of the American people to the idea of democratic change, the American tradition of free dialogue, and of hierarchically unfettered expression of disagreement has been an important factor in developing this responsiveness to change. It has made it possible to exploit protest movements, and thereby render them historically superfluous, by adapting and adopting their programs. This is to deny neither the element of violence in American history, nor the oft-noted conservatism of the electorate. Nevertheless, the fundamental reality of American life has been the assimilation of the rapid change induced by the frontier, by immigration, and by industrial growth. A dynamic socio-economic reality has blended with a certain political conservatism and created a pluralist socio-political system that has in the past proven itself to be remarkably resilient in absorbing extraordinary change. It possesses a structural quality capable of generating and deciphering warning signals of mounting social stress. Today's America has set higher standards for itself than has any other society. It aims at creating racial harmony on the basis of equality. at achieving social welfare while preserving personal liberty, at eliminating poverty without shackling individual freedom. Tensions in the United States might be less were it to seek less, but in its ambitious goals, America retains its innovative character. Though the new left, and particularly the violent left, has temporarily served to fortify socially conservative or even reactionary trends, the impatience of the young is more and more likely to permeate the socio-political system, especially as they begin to occupy more influential positions and make it more responsive to the need for change and reform. Moreover, the increasingly international experience of the American intellectual and business elite has already prompted a greater inclination to consider contemporary problems within a larger framework, thereby drawing lessons for the United States from both the political evolution and the social innovation of other advanced countries. Excuse me. As a result, hang on, we got a footnote. For example, it's now more candidly admitted that America has much to learn from Western Europe in metropolitan planning, in local urban planning, in regionalization, in the development of new towns, and in social and legal innovation. Back to the text. As a result, more Americans recognize that the two broad areas of needed and, it is to be hoped, developing change involve the institutional and the cultural aspects of American society. The former largely, though not exclusively, pertains to the political sphere, the latter to the educational domain, particularly as it concerns the content and the shaping of national values. More deliberate change in both realms would serve as a catalyst for reform in other areas of national life, providing both the framework and the motivation for the timely adoption of needed remedies. So that's interesting, this bit here about the educational domain concerns the content and the shaping of national values. So that's telling you the importance of these indoctrination centers and why it's so critical to get as many people going through them as possible, because that's what shapes the values of the country when those people grow up and go out to the workforce and take on various positions of authority and control in whatever organization that they happen to be in. So the next section is participatory pluralism. The approaching 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence could justify the call for a national constitutional convention to re-examine the nation's formal institutional framework. Either 1976 or 1989, the 200th anniversary of the Constitution, could serve as a suitable target date for culminating a national dialogue on the relevance of existing arrangements, the workings of the representative process, and the desirability of imitating the various European regionalization reforms and of streamlining the administrative structure. More important still, either date would provide a suitable occasion for redefining the meaning of modern democracy. Redefining the meaning of modern democracy. So just change it. Just change it. A task admittedly challenging, but not necessarily more so than when it was undertaken by the Founding Fathers, and for setting ambitious and concrete social goals. There's a footnote. For example, 1976 could provide a target date for a massive effort to terminate poverty as currently defined, or to bring Negro education up to the national average. 1989 for ecological targets. Terminate poverty. That's sounding a lot like UN, isn't it? One of the UN SDGs, is it the first one even? Eliminate, I think they say eliminate poverty. That just means, because poverty's not subjective, but it's comparative, isn't it? Like, you could argue you're in poverty when you compare yourself to somebody who has much, much more than you. So poverty is a sort of contextual thing. And when they say they're going to eliminate poverty or they're going to terminate poverty, what exactly are they talking about? what needs to happen to people's income levels and material comforts and quality and standards of living for that to take place. They don't really elaborate usually. But we'll go back to the text. We're here. Realism, however, forces us to recognize that the necessary political innovation will not come from direct constitutional reform, desirable as that would be. There's a footnote here. For example, one simple, though admittedly unattainable, constitutional reform would go a long way toward making Congress more responsive to social evolution. The passage of a congressional equivalent of the 22nd Amendment limiting the presidential term of office. Back to the text. The needed change is more likely to develop incrementally and less overtly. Nonetheless, its eventual scope may be far-reaching, especially as the political process gradually assimilates scientific technological change. Thus, in the political sphere, the increased flow of information and the development of more efficient techniques of coordination may make possible greater devolution of authority and responsibility to the lower levels of government and society. In the past, the division of power has traditionally caused problems of inefficiency, poor coordination, and dispersal of authority. But today, the new communications and computation techniques make possible both increased authority at the lower levels and almost instant national coordination. Footnote. These techniques could also be used to improve electoral procedures and to provide for closer consultation between the public and its representatives. Existing electoral machinery in the United States in regard to both registration and voting has simply not kept up with innovation in electronic communications and computation. Reforms, such as electronic home voting consoles, to make it possible for representatives of the public to consult their constituents rapidly, and for these constituents to express their views easily, are both technically possible and likely to develop in view of growing dissatisfaction with present machinery. More intense consultation, not necessarily only on the national level, or only in regard to political institutions, would further enhance the responsiveness of the American social and political system. See, that all that bit there, that's a lot of hot air. Because yes, he's right. He knew, or he just correctly predicted, that these home consoles would exist. But they don't want more interference with their constituents, right? They don't want to be polling their constituents in real time because they don't represent their constituents. Like these guys who get into politics, they represent the layer above them, the true owners, the people above and outside and beyond nations and politics and religions, right? The people who create all those systems and hand them off to be perpetuated by their lackeys, by that bureaucratic buffer that they have around them. So I've thought many times how we've got the technology to really overhaul this voting and to make people's opinions and ideas heard, and yet they don't roll it out, right? They'll roll out all this digital ID and surveillance so that they can manipulate you and control your money and what you spend it on and what information you can access and what social media platforms you can use and turn your money on and off and freeze your bank accounts and all this stuff. But they'll never use it to give you more power over your so-called supposed elected representatives, because they're not your elected representatives. They are actors, script readers, and their purpose is to uphold the illusion that there is some kind of political system that represents you when there isn't. So he's put that in there because it's logical and it makes sense, and it makes him sound like he actually cares about democracy and he wants to see it improve, but he doesn't. It's never going to happen, obviously. It would have been one of the first things to be implemented when we got the internet and when we got all these gadgets, but instead it's just gone down the route of total, complete surveillance, mind control, and mind manipulation. So that's its real purpose right there. But we'll go back to the text. Here we are. The rapid transferal of information combined with highly advanced analytical methods, would also make possible broad national planning, in the looser French sense of target definition, not only concentrating on economic goals, but more clearly defining ecological and cultural objectives. Technological developments make it certain that modern society will require more and more planning. Deliberate management of the American future will become widespread, with the planner eventually displacing the lawyer as the key social legislator and manipulator. This will put a greater emphasis on defining goals and, by the same token, on a more self-conscious preoccupation with social ends. How to combine social planning with personal freedom is already emerging as the key dilemma of technotronic America, replacing the industrial age's preoccupation with balancing social needs against requirements of free enterprise. So, social planning with personal freedom. The strengthening of local, especially metropolitan government, is already recognized as an urgent necessity for the democratic process in the United States. The devolution of financial responsibility to lower echelons of the political system may encourage both the flow of better talent and greater local participation in more important local decision-making. National coordination and local participation could thus be wedded by new systems of coordination. This has already been tried successfully by some large businesses. The trend toward more coordination but less centralization would be in keeping with the American tradition of blurring sharp distinctions between public and private institutions. Institutions such as TVA or the Ford Foundation perform functions difficult for many Europeans to understand, since they are more accustomed either to differentiate sharply between the public sphere and the private, as has been typical of the industrial age, or to subordinate the private to the public, as is favoured by the socialists and some liberals, or to absorb the private by the public, as has been the case in communist states. So again, that's showing you the broad overview of the different systems and what are available. I'm just going to sneeze, I think. Hang on a sec. It's one of those where you're like not quite sure if it's going to arrive or not. False alarm, no sneeze. Back to the text. At one time, the question of ownership was the decisive social and political issue of a society undergoing modernization. The forms of land ownership customary in the feudal agricultural age were extended through force of habit as well as historical accommodation into the industrial age. Owning a factory was seen as being largely the same as owning a piece of land. This eventually led to a severe conflict between old forms and modes of evaluating individual rights and the new requirements of industrial organization, of collective employee rights, and of changed socio-political institutions. Socialism was one extreme solution. In the more advanced West, depersonalized corporate ownership and the limited sharing of authority which organized labor was the general pattern of accommodation. The question of ownership was thus redefined into one of control and regulation, while the issue of exploitation associated with ownership was replaced by new problems concerning the economic participation and psychological well-being of the employed. In the process, even in America, the federal government emerged as the key institution for restructuring social relations, and the question of the extent of the state's role in economic affairs became crucial. Unlike the agricultural age, during which few state institutions were involved in organizing and assisting man's daily existence, the industrial age produced both greater opportunities for national direction and a greater social demand for government-imposed social justice. More centralized direction by the state seemed the only alternative to chaos and the only response to social injustice. Yes, the existence of government is the only thing that's stopping us all ripping each other to bits. The only alternative to chaos, sure. Our age has been moving toward a new pattern, blurring distinctions between public and private bodies. So again, that's your public-private partnerships. and encouraging more cross-participation in both by their employees and members. In Europe, co-determination not only has involved profit sharing, but has increasingly led to participation in policy making. Pressures in the same direction are clearly building up in the United States as well. At the same time, the widening social perspectives of the American business community are likely to increase the involvement of business executives in social problems, thereby merging private and public activity on both the local and the national levels. The 1970 is telling us about public-private partnerships, thereby merging private and public activity locally and nationally. This might, in turn, make for more effective social application of the new management techniques. It might do. And the new management techniques are the technocratic, technotronic systems of control, which, unlike bureaucratized governmental procedures, have proved both efficient and responsive to external stimuli. Just give me a sec. I'm going to blow my nose again. Public-private partnerships announced by Zbigniew Brzezinski back in 1970. We got a footnote to that last bit we read. It's a gigantic footnote. It's not. It only goes down to halfway. He says, this is especially ironic since the government has sponsored the transfer of many technological innovations from defense to private industry. See R. Lester and G. Howick, Assessing Technology Transfer, which was a NASA publication from 1966. He says, at the same time, the internal bureaucratic procedures of many government agencies lag in technological innovation as compared with major banks or corporations. Bureaucratic rigidity appears to be a function of size and hierarchy. A study by 16 leading research administrators reported in the spring of 1967 that small independent communities have been much more innovative technologically than large companies. And that is Peter Drucker, The Age of Discontinuity. It's a 1969 book. To my mind, that's telling you that the corporations are the ones that are really have more power and control and influence, right? And we know that corporations at this stage, I don't think back in the 70s, I don't know, I might be wrong, but at this stage, 2025, some corporations are bigger than and have more economic turnover than countries. They're international, they are supranational, they span the globe, and they have more economic activity and productivity than actual countries. And so this gradual turning over of power and authority and influence to corporations and corporate elites, I think, is partly accounts for what he's describing here in that the government using old systems. Like I was on a commission fairly recently for the civil service, and they're still using Skype. Up until very recently, they were still using Skype, and they just phased it out. But that's just an example of software. But that, I think, is because these are antiquated organizations. They're outdated. They're no longer where it's at in terms of power and influence and importance. They are sort of relics that are kept alive so that the illusion of liberal democracy can be kept alive in the minds of people who aren't questioning and who are just going along to get along and distracted and living their lives and trying to pay their bills and busy and all these other things that take up our time. They don't have the time to hang out for 3 hours on Hayes Reviews every Friday night, right? So, yeah, like Frank says, private industry is just Palantir and Google and all those groups of the big tech bros. So let me go back to the text here, where this paragraph. Such participatory pluralism may prove reasonably effective in subordinating science and technology to social ends. In the past, for some, The introduction of the machine was the beginning of utopia, and for others it meant the unleashing of evil. Similarly, today technology is seen by some modern conservatives as the beginning of a happy new age because it promises to free man from many social problems, while for the new left, technotronics is replacing property as the symbol of social evil. Yet, the crucial issue remains the ends to which science and technology are applied, and a society in which effective coordination is combined with decentralization is more likely to crystallize the necessary discussion and reflection. Scientific expertise can then be mobilized for social ends without granting scientists a dominating political role because of their scientific credentials. There is a footnote here. On the complex question of the role of scientists in policymaking, comments by Don K. Price in The Scientific Estate and by Sanford A. Lakoff and J. Stephen Dupree in Science and the Nation, Policy and Politics are especially pertinent. There is no reason to believe that scientific competence is sufficient for relevant judgments concerning all areas of social existence or public policy. Indeed, though somewhat exaggerated, the observations of a French social thinker on the dangers of excessive deference to the non-scientific opinions of scientists have some merit. Quote, "We are forced to conclude that our scientists are incapable of any but the emptiest platitudes when they stray from their specialties. It makes one think back on the collection of mediocrities accumulated by Einstein when he spoke of God, the state, peace, and the meaning of life. It is clear that Einstein, extraordinary mathematical genius that he was no Pascal. He knew nothing of political or human reality, or in fact anything at all outside his mathematical reach. The banality of Einstein's remarks in matters outside his specialty is as astonishing as his genius within it. It seems as though the specialized application of all one's faculties in a particular area inhibits the consideration of things in general. Even J. Robert Oppenheimer, who seems receptive to a general culture, is not outside this judgment. His political and social declarations, for example, scarcely go beyond the level of those of the man in the street, and the opinions of the scientists quoted by L'Express are not even on the level of Einstein or Oppenheimer. Their pomposities, in fact, do not rise to the level of the average. They are vague generalities inherited from the 19th century, and the fact that they represent the furthest limits of thought of our scientific worthies must be symptomatic of arrested development or of a mental block. Particularly disquieting is the gap between the enormous power they wield and their critical ability, which must be estimated as null. For some suggestive analogies, see R. Todd, George Wald, The Man, the Speech, the New York Times Magazine. That big quote that we just read there is from Jacques Ellul, page 453. I'm not sure what the book is, though. I have to check that out in the footnotes at the back. So back to the text here. We got participatory pluralism will automatically ensure neither political wisdom nor social responsibility, but it might make for a society that more nearly approaches both. Anticipation of the social effects of technological innovation offers a good example of the necessary forms of cross-institutional cooperation. One of the nation's most urgent needs is the creation of a variety of mechanisms that link national and local governments, academia, and the business community. There, the example of NASA may be especially rewarding, in the task of evaluating not only the operational effects of the new technologies, but their cultural and psychological effects. A series of national and local councils, not restricted to scientists, but made up of various social groups, including the clergy, would be in keeping with both the need and the emerging pattern of social response to change. Footnote. This would go beyond the task set the National Commission on Technology, Automation and Economic Progress, authorized by Congress in 1964, and also address itself to the issues with which, for example, the British Society for Social Responsibility in Science has been grappling. An editorial in Science on the control of technology errs in implying that the above matter should be restricted to scientists. Social scientists, the clergy, and humanists should also be involved, and the Special Commission on the Social Scientists, established in 1968 by the National Science Board, could well be drawn in. The trend toward the progressive breakdown of sharp distinctions between the political and social spheres, between public and private institutions, will not lend itself easy to classification as liberal, conservative, or socialist, all terms derived from a different historical context. But it will be a major step toward the participatory democracy advocated by some of the New Left in the late 1960s. So he's saying you're in 1970, because of technology, we're beyond liberal, conservative, and socialist at this point. Those labels are outdated. Ironically, this participatory democracy is likely to emerge through a progressive symbiosis of the institutions of society and of government, rather than through the remedies the New Left have been advocating. Economic expropriation and political revolution, both distinctly anachronistic remedies of the earlier industrial era. The evolutionary emergence of participatory pluralism may not seem a sufficient response to those sectors of American society that have become entirely alienated, and it may appear as too much change to those who have a vested interest in the status quo. But for that large body of Americans who accept the concept of gradual change and who value procedural order, multiple patterns of social involvement could provide the desired creative outlet for a society that is increasingly becoming more complex and expert-oriented. In that setting, it is even possible that the political parties as traditionally known in America will further decline in importance. In their stead, organized local, regional, urban, professional, and other interests will provide the focus for political action, and shifting national coalitions will form on an ad hoc basis around specific issues of national import. The footnote says these coalitions are less likely to form along the traditional dividing line of Republicans and Democrats, or, as more recently, of conservatives and liberals, but rather to divide according to basic philosophical attitudes toward the problems of modern life. In greatly simplified terms, the humanists and idealists on one side might be pitted against the pragmatists and modernizers on the other. Well, that never came to be, did it? People are still doing the red team, blue team game. Continuing. In the immediate future, the politics of street protest are likely to dominate the visible dimensions of American political life. Less visible indeed, sometimes totally obscured by the prevailing rhetoric about the repressive society, is the gradual progress toward a new democracy, increasingly based on participatory pluralism in many areas of life. Assuming that short-term crises do not deflect the United States from redefining the substance of its democratic tradition, the long-range effect of the present transition and its turmoils will be to deepen and widen the scope of the democratic process in America. And that's the end of that section. Let's see where we are at. We're on page 269, and the book ends on page, looks like 309. So we've got 44 pages left. We'll crack on and do a little bit more today, and then we'll leave ourselves. We'll read up to rational humanism. We'll do this next section, and then we'll leave ourselves 34 pages for next Friday. So this next section we're going into now is change in cultural formation. The evolutionary development of American democracy will have to be matched by changes in the processes of forming and shaping the content of its national culture. That's an interesting sentence. What that tells you is that culture is given to you, right? As Alan Watt often says, forming and shaping, forming the national culture. the culture creation industry. You are given your culture, it's handed to you. The special days to celebrate, the behaviors, the foods, the languages, the phrases, the behaviors, all of this. It's designed and then rolled out and given to you and then tweaked and updated as we roll on through the decades. So he's saying that as American democracy changes, the culture will have to be tweaked and updated to go along with it. So continuing. As in the case of political change, cultural reform is more likely to come about through evolution, in part deliberately encouraged and in part stimulated by overall social change than through programmatic engineering. Okay. So it's just going to evolve naturally rather than being engineered. The element of deliberate and conscious choice may be even more important here than in the transformation of complex institutional arrangements, because in modern society, the educational system and the mass media have become the principal social means for defining the substance of a national culture. So there you go. It's not the people, it's not the religion, it's not the history, it's not the traditions, it's not the families. It's the indoctrination and the mass media. This is particularly true in American society, which has downgraded such alternative sources of culture as churches and traditional cultures. Downgraded. So it was just a decision by American society, whatever that is and whoever that is, to downgrade churches and traditions. Did you get that memo? Did you remember voting on that, you Americans in the audience? Because you did, apparently. So continuing, the educational system has a special social responsibility in regard to Black Americans. Here, the simultaneous needs are to enhance the Black citizen's dignity and to enlarge his long-range opportunities. These needs have occasionally clashed, but perhaps the short-term remedy will be to combine the Black American's quest for his separate identity through such institutional devices as separate courses and residences with massive and scientifically oriented remedial training. The challenge today, and probably for several decades to come, is to help the Black American skip the late industrial stage of America's development, and this cannot be done unless sensitivity to his psychological needs is matched by a recognition of the necessity for a disciplined, focused intellectual effort. The two will be hard to combine, but it is in this area that eventual progress or disaster in America's race relations will be shaped. Racial calamity will be avoided only if society at large defines more clearly the values it seeks, is willing to create a responsive framework to promote them, and is prepared to insist on respect for orderly procedure. Nothing could be more destructive than wide swings from permissive and guilt-ridden acquiescence to any demand made by Black extremists. Such acquiescence merely stimulates an escalation of extremism, to insensitive passivity or opposition to Black demands for a fair share of participation in American society. A massive educational effort is a crucial factor, but to be successful, it must be geared to the long-range thrust of American society's developmental needs. The unprecedented spread of mass education in America raises the more general question whether mechanically extending the duration of education will suffice to meet both the psychological and technical needs of the emerging society. The social scope and duration of current mass education differs from the early industrial emphasis on minimum mass literacy for males, and from the even more elitist medieval pattern of very limited learning for very few. Contemporary programs aim at the education of a high proportion of both sexes and call for periods of schooling lasting anywhere from 10 to almost 20 years. I'm glad he called it schooling there, because that's what it is. It's not education, it's schooling. In America, higher education is carried on within a relatively self-contained organizational and even social framework, making for a protracted period of semi-isolation from problems of social reality. Yeah, so extended adolescence, in other words. As a result, both organizationally and in terms of content, a divorce between education and social existence has tended to develop, leading to the already noted emotional and psychic manifestations of student frustration and immaturity. By extending education on an intermittent basis throughout the lifetime of the citizen, society would go a long way toward meeting this problem. Oh, that's interesting. So that's this idea of more courses and training and updates and tweaks, right? Because as he said here, it is education that creates the national culture, the educational system and the mass media. So to prepare people, the society, for the changes that are planned and that are coming, then you're going to have this lifetime process of education so that the updates and the tweaks and the downloads can be constantly provided. So it's not like you just get what you need and that'll last you for the rest of your life. As new changes are rolled out, new technologies are deployed, as society shifts and work patterns change and the job market changes and shifts and is updated, people need to be educated so that they can adapt to that. They need to be updated as well to match the system as it goes through its quote-unquote evolution, which is actually just an engineered, planned process of change. So it's quite interesting that you said that. Continuing, the duration of the self-contained and relatively isolated phase of initial education could then be shortened, taking into account the earlier physical and sexual maturation of young people today. It could be more generally pursued within a work-study framework, and it should be supplemented by periodic additional training throughout most of one's active life. A good case can be made for ending initial education, more of which could be obtained in the home through electronic devices. Yeah, because that worked so well, didn't it, when we all got locked down and all the school children had to learn through their laptops. Somewhere around the age of 18. This formal initial period could be followed by 2 years of service in a socially desirable cause. Footnote. This cause could be either national or international, publicly or privately tackled. It would be in keeping with the humanitarian idealism of the young not to limit such service to national causes. One good way to handle the matter would be to maintain a list of acceptable humanitarian activities, service on behalf of which would be an acceptable equivalent for military duty. So harness the young people's idealism and desire to see good things happen for all the world's people and get them involved in international movements and organizations and humanitarian efforts. You can see the seeds of kind of indoctrinating them into UN sustainable development and SDG types ways of thinking, subverting their allegiance to the nation, the country. He's already admitted that the church and the traditional customs no longer provide the national culture that gets given to people through the education system and the mass media. Now he's saying that students, young people, should be sent off to be involved in international humanitarian causes, further hastening their transformation into what you might call global citizens. Back to the text. He says, then, by direct involvement in some professional activity and by advanced systematic training within that area, and finally by regular periods of 1 and eventually even 2 years of broadening integrative study at the beginning of every decade of one's life, somewhere up to the age of 60. Footnote says, this change should focus the attention of the university on the broader integrative integrative needs of the modern age. It would thus combine science with philosophy, but no longer act as an intellectual cafeteria, offering studies ranging from physical education through classics, from soul courses to the latest specialized sciences. In effect, the roles of the junior college and of the university would become separate in time and place, probably to the advantage of both institutions. This would permit concentration on the larger social questions and keep higher education from being an aristocratic process. At the same time, it would allay some of the dangers inherent in the illusion that an educated citizenry is created by simply running a lot of people through the educational mill. In addition, the traditional titles of learning, such as Doctor of Philosophy, imply a terminal educational process and reflect the situation of an earlier stage in social history. Since learning will become a continuous lifetime process that involves almost the entire community, degrees become a symbolic anachronism and should be drastically reclassified to indicate more accurately the various stages of specialized and generalized knowledge. He's actually saying some stuff that makes sense here. That's probably why David Rockefeller decided to recruit him, bring him into the fold. Shut him up. He's got too many good ideas. Well, not too many good ideas, but some good ideas. So degrees are an symbolic anachronism. That's what I was saying earlier in this broadcast about young people going to university, right? And also, learning will become a continuous lifetime process that involves everybody. You will continually be updated. You will continually be tweaked. You will continually be adjusted throughout your life. Back to the text. Oh, wait. That's the end of that. Yeah, that's the end of that footnote. For example, medical or legal training could begin after only 2 years of college, thus both shortening the time needed to complete the training and probably also increasing the number attracted into these professions. Regularly and formally requiring retraining as well as broadening could ensue at regular intervals throughout most of one's professional career. Combining initial specialization with a subsequent broadening of philosophical and scientific horizons would somewhat counteract the present trend, which makes increased specialization and rising professional standing go hand in hand. This encourages a narrowness of general outlook. The trend could be gradually reversed by a situation in which specialization at the age of greatest absorptive capability would be followed by more intellectual integration at a stage of increased personal maturity. Such an approach would encourage the gradual emergence of an integrative, modernizing elite that would show greater concern with society's underlying humane values in an age in which intensive scientific specialization is fraught with dangers of intellectual fragmentation. These educational reforms are actually pretty good that he's suggesting here, I think. Far too sensible. We can't be having these ideas getting out. There's a quote. There's a footnote. One of the paradoxes of the future is that while an increasing number of managerial decisions will be handled by automatic data processing, buttressed by clear and swift communications networks, the intelligent direction and coordination of large-scale systems will place an even greater premium than at present upon the wise, artful, and broadly experienced general manager in organizations characterized by operational decentralization. In short, the proposition that effective decentralization can occur only where organizational centralization has become efficient will have become the increasingly recognized, not as a paradox, but as a logical reality. That's from a book or an article, I'm not sure which, called The United States and the World in the 1985 era. What is interesting to me about that is this managerial decisions being handled by automatic data processing. So I'd like to know what the book or the article is that that quote comes from, or that because it doesn't give us the author, it just tells us page 44, the United States and the World in the 1985 era. I have to search that title, find out what it's from. Back to the text. The formal education system has been relatively slow in exploiting the new opportunities for supplementary home-based education through television consoles and other electronic devices. It has also been suspicious of the growing inclination of non-governmental organizations to develop their own learning and training programs. In different ways, however, both the black community and business are becoming more involved in education for psychological as well as professional reasons. Footnote says, for example, Olin Corporation, noting in an advertisement that there is no growth potential in ignorance, has instituted literacy and high school training programs in 3 of its plants. Other major corporations have similar training programs. Back to the text. Greater multiplicity in educational training will make for a more pluralistic national community, and the increasing involvement of business companies in education may lead to a more rapid adaptation of the latest techniques and scientific knowledge to the education process. American business, and to a lesser extent the government, have already undertaken extensive programs of managerial retooling and retraining, thereby moving toward the intermittent educational pattern. Change in educational procedures and philosophy should also be accompanied by parallel changes in the broader national processes by which values are generated and disseminated. Values are generated and disseminated. Given America's role as a world disseminator of new values and techniques, this is both a national and a global obligation. That's your global obligation. Yet no other country has permitted its mass culture, taste, daily amusement, and, most important, the indirect education of its children to be almost exclusively the domain of private business and advertising, or permitted both standards of taste and the intellectual content of culture to be defined largely by a small group of entrepreneurs located in one metropolitan center. American television, in which a cultural monopoly is exercised by a relatively small group, reflects the insensitivity of the communications process to the tastes and philosophical values of much of America. And there's a footnote here, which is a quote. Broadcasting has imposed upon American society what in the supreme civic sense may be a fatal contradiction. The extension of communication should be an extension of democracy. Yet, while the participatory base of democracy has been broadening, the ownership and control of the means of communication have narrowed. It could be said, indeed, that far from being an expression of majority desire, as the networks say, television programs are the imposition of a social minority on the majority, the minority consisting of the 50 top advertisers, the 3 networks, and a dozen or so advertising agencies. That's from the book Primetime, The Life of Edward R. Murrow, 1969 book. Yes, and that aligns very much as well with what we learned in the 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television by Jerry Mander, who was a TV advertising exec. He said exactly the same thing. He said the medium of the television cannot be reformed because of its nature, the way it is. It's going to be used by the minority to dominate the majority. So that aligns very much. And because Americanism is exported across the world, that's why it's a global obligation. So here's that admission that America is creating the values and disseminating is America is a world disseminator of new values and techniques. So back in the 70s, this was known, and this has continued ever since then. This is why you're getting the standardization and homogenization of society and culture all over the place, all over the globe. Continuing, we've got about a page to read, and then we'll wrap it up. Rising public dissatisfaction with this state of affairs indicates that perhaps some change has to come in this field as well. The geographical decentralization and dispersal of the television industry into more numerous units, the separation of broadcasting from program production, and the further extension of educational programming will probably be sharply opposed by existing interests. If past American experience can serve as a relevant guide, change will come by attrition and piecemeal reform, rather than by wholesale adjustment. Here again, scientific and technological developments may become the handmaidens of constructive change. They may make possible, through home videotapes, home-operated lenses, closed-channel programming, far greater diversity than is today available, as well as more extensive exploitation of the audio-visual media by more institutions and organizations. Instead of limiting intellectual horizons, television could become a diversified and intellectually enriching source of this society's overall cultural growth. Cultural change in our society may also be spurred by the growing female rebellion, accelerated by education and new sexual mores. The massive entrance of women into the professions, into exec positions, and into politics is probably only a generation away, and there is already abundant evidence of mounting restlessness because of current inequalities of opportunity. Such increased feminine assertiveness could spill over into American society's cultural front, enhancing somewhat the general social interest in cultural growth and standards. And I just looked ahead, and this next section, rational humanism, we might as well just finish that off, and then we can end this chapter and polish the rest off next Friday. But yeah, he's describing exactly what happened, right? The women entered the workforce, and that had a profound effect on all sorts of different things. Not least the family unit at home, right? Now you need two adults out of the household working full time to afford to pay the bills, which means the children have to go off and be schooled, and they're indoctrinated into this new way of thinking, having their values updated and tweaked and given to them, whereas the church used to do it, whereas the parents would pass on the cultural traditions and customs that they grew up with. None of that anymore. Mum and dad have to go out to work. Children have to go to schooling to get their indoctrination, to prepare them for the changes that they're going to live through 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years into the future, right? Lee says they knew how powerful the TV would be. It was probably tested in a lab before it was let loose on the public. I agree 100%. I'm looking for a good kind of history or account of the development of the television as a technology, including the different phases that it went through and the tests and the and where it was tested and when. And because I agree with you, I think it was definitely tested before it was rolled out to make it as hypnotic and attention grabbing and sort of sedative as possible. If that's a word, sedative, like sedatory. I don't know. I get a bit like almost 2.5 hours into the live stream, I start to make up words. But just that effect that lulls people into this sort of trance-like state and makes them their mouths open and they drool and they stare at the screen. Like I'm sure they have studied this and perfected it, and with each new television that they roll out, the new model, they improve it. And I always remember hearing, I think Alan Watt saying on a talk that the television, nobody had a television and then everybody had one suddenly. And the way this was done was by extending credit to the average Joe and Jane public so that they could rent a television. And it was one of the first items that people were allowed, because you had to rent them at first, and then you could take out credit and gradually pay it off. and it was one of the first items that the public were given access to credit in order to buy, which is quite interesting. I haven't confirmed that or checked it out, or I just recall hearing that, but it would make sense because they had to get that TV, get that device, get that cultural manipulation weapon into everybody's homes. And you see it today. I always mention, you walk down the street, glowing rectangles, the grods, the glowing rectangles of doom, just of death, sorry, but doom also works. Just people opening up their minds to this and just killing and wasting untold amounts of hours in front of these things, and all they're getting is tweaks to their worldview. They're getting updates and upgrades to their language, to their views, their opinions. They're getting trained into what you can say, what you can't say, what you talk about, what you should talk about, what you shouldn't talk about. It's just so blatantly a mind control and manipulation mechanism that when you see that, when you realize that, it's so obvious. And so, yeah, I completely agree, Lee. I'd love to know a deeper, more detailed history on the development and the rollout of that particular gadget. So yeah, we'll finish rational humanism, then we'll call it a night. So we're going on a little bit longer, but it's nice to end. So we've got a fresh chapter to dive into at the start of next week's show. So rational humanism, this is probably, I guess, going to align with Huxley's Philosophy and Purpose of UNESCO, where he talked quite extensively about a new scientific humanism that was going to be the overarching ethos of the world system, and of course, UNESCO being the educational wing and the scientific wing of the UN. So humanism, it's one of those isms that we've got to pay attention to and try and understand, even though if you look it up on Wikipedia, it tells you that there's no clear definition of it. No, there's no agreed definition or formal definition of it. And when you do look into it, what you tend to find is subjective morality, right? Whatever makes you happy goes, and if it makes a human happy, it's therefore acceptable and should be protected and respected, right? So you can imagine what dark places you could and extremes you could take that line of thinking to, and that's what you see. That's what we do see, in this present era. It's quite disturbing. But let's see what old Zbig has to say in this section, which is rational humanism. The technological thrust and the economic wealth of the United States now make it possible to give the concept of liberty and equality a broader meaning. I'm just laughing because you can update it, right? Like liberty and equality, they just update language and concepts, and like we'll change it, we'll tweak it, we'll redefine it, we'll rebrand it. It's over and over and over again, and you would think there would be one definition of liberty and one definition of equality, and that would stand because it would be the true definition of those terms, and truth doesn't change. It doesn't alter. It is eternal and existing and belligerent, and it cannot be tweaked and updated, right? And broadened. But, this is what happens when you live in a subjective world where everything is just wishy-washy, man-made, artificial, and concocted by think tanks and experts. You get to update and change and broaden things on the fly as you go along. And, they'll introduce, I guess they'll probably, these long-term planners, introduce a concept, and they'll have each phase of that idea and how it's going to widen and broaden and change and shift over time. So when we introduce it in this era, at first, it's only going to have this little sort of narrow meaning, right? And then as we go through time and the planned events and the things that are rolled out that are planned to happen, then we can update and change and broaden the meaning of these terms as we go along to match the event and the styles and the times that we're living in and living through, right? So that's probably how it's done. But back to the writing. Going beyond the procedural and external to the personal and inner spheres of man's social existence, by focusing more deliberately on these qualitative aspects of life America may avoid the depersonalizing dangers inherent in the self-generating but philosophically meaningless mechanization of environment and build a social framework for a synthesis of man's external and inner dimensions. Like had never been done before. Such a synthesis may eventually result from the current intense conflict between the irrational personalism of the, quote, humanists and the impersonal rationality of the, quote, modernizers. The former group, source of much of the rhetoric of the literary community, the student activists, and the doctrinaire liberals, partakes of the tradition of skepticism and disbelief that played such a vital role in overthrowing the religious and philosophical hold of pre-industrial America on the values of industrial America. It seeks to fortify this tradition by a new emphasis on emotion and feeling. Given its Dadaist style and its Luddite-inspired historical posture, it's unlikely that this camp will long remain vital. The potential transformation of the new left into the violent left will certainly not enhance its appeal to the American public. The latter group, more typical of the new business executives, the governmental commercial establishment, and the scientific organization men, seeks to combine self-interest with a detached emphasis on rationalist innovation. Since it fails to provide a satisfactory emotional or philosophical rationale for either, it alienates the more idealistic young people. As a footnote, modern psychology increasingly recognizes that the non-concrete, more abstract qualities of life, such as goodness, aesthetic beauty, and morality, are becoming more and more important in satisfying individual wants in modern society. However, the quest for these more abstract and emotional satisfactions often takes ludicrous forms. The late 60s have seen in America a proliferation of various institutes and seminars in which businessmen and others engage in special sensitivity seances, expose themselves to brainwave conditioning, undertake yoga exercises and sustained meditation and the like. These fads reflect the fracturing of the broader, more integrative frameworks of belief, as noted in our discussion in Part 2. Back to the text. The clash between these two orientations is destructive and threatening to American liberal democracy. It fragments the remnants of the consensus of the industrial age and polarizes articulate public opinion. Yet it also holds the promise of a new perspective that is better suited to the needs of the emerging American society, since it moves beyond the increasingly irrelevant framework that now confines modern man's outlook. This new perspective involves growing recognition that man's propensity for scientific innovation cannot be restrained. That's one of those generalizations, like man's propensity for scientific innovation. I don't think it's all men and women. I think it's a small clique. It's the ones who view scientific innovation as a means to power and control, and who crave that sort of thing. In other words, it's the psychopathic minority. But they just generalize and apply that psychopathic view to all men and say, oh, it's just a part of men. They're all like that. He says, continuing, that as long as man's mind functions, scientific innovation will be one of its expressions. But it also involves a heightened awareness that as long as man conceives of himself as a distinctive being, idealism will be the central mode of expressing his spirit. The imperative need for both innovation and idealism is thus stimulating a rationalist, humane outlook that is gradually supplanting both the liberal skepticism of some humanists and the conservative social indifference of some modernizers. This rational humanism is expressed in several ways. First, in an emerging international consciousness that makes so many Americans and American institutions go beyond purely nationalistic concerns and become deeply involved in global problems of human growth and nourishment, and is prompting in American youth such a constructive preoccupation with problems of ecology. Second, in a growing tendency, in spite of a still deeply ingrained anti-communism, to view international problems as human issues and not as political confrontations between good and evil. Third, in a strong public idealism that is free of a utopian, impatient, and often intolerant desire to resolve all outstanding dilemmas immediately. In addition, it can also be seen in the fact that Americans, instead of trying to flee the problems of science, are attempting to balance their fascination with science and their reliance on it as a tool for dealing with human problems by a more intense concern with the personal qualities of life and by a quest for more philosophical and religiously ecumenical definitions of human nature. This suggests the likelihood of a revival of religiosity of a more personal, non-institutional nature. Finally, the emerging rational humanism is historically contingent in the sense that it does not involve, as was the case with 19th century ideology, universally prescriptive concepts of social organization, but stresses cultural and economic global diversity. In so doing, rational humanism is likely to be historically more relevant than was the case with early responses to social dilemmas. Unlike the industrial age, when complexity and historical discontinuity induced ideological flights of the mind into atavism or futuristic utopias, in the technotronic age, the greater availability of means permits the definition of more attainable ends, thus making for a less doctrinaire and a more effective relationship between what is and what ought to be. The great revolutions of the 19th and 20th centuries sought both liberty and equality. But even in the absence of racial conflict, it was found that the two were difficult to combine in an age in which the traditional institutions of a religious, aristocratic, and agricultural era were clashing with the effects of skeptical rationalism, legalistic democracy, nascent social consciousness, and the needs of a developing urban industrial society. In America, the linkage of liberty and equality was especially hindered by deeply embedded fundamentalist religious values that were reinforced by the ever-widening gap between the progressing white community and the artificially arrested black community. Inequality became a self-fulfilling prophecy as well as an economic necessity to the industrially developing North. The positive potential of the Third American Revolution lies in its promise to link liberty with equality. This linkage is a process and will not be attained all at once. Indeed, during the next several decades, reversals and even increased tensions are to be expected. Nevertheless, though frequently obscured by passionate polemics, the emerging rational humanism is part of the cultural revolution that America has been experiencing. A cultural revolution more enduring and deeper than the one that initiated the term. Linked to political reform, the current cultural revolution could gradually enlarge the scope of personal freedom by increasing the sense of self-fulfillment on an unprecedented number of citizens and give greater meaning to equality by making knowledge the basis for social and racial egalitarianism. It could create the preconditions for a socially creative and individually gratifying society and would inevitably have a constructive world role to play. That all-important world role. So, that is the end of the American future. Pretty good chapter. A lot of stuff there. It's an interesting one to read given the hindsight that we have here in 2025, as I said earlier. And his fairly spot-on, accurate descriptions of how America shapes the rest of the world and develops through its media and its education, quote-unquote education, we know it as schooling, but through these mechanisms that replaced the church and replaced the traditional customs handed down through parents and to their children. Now you got the media coming through the television. You've got the schooling that's going to last for everybody for your whole life. The updates and the tweaks and the downloads and the new latest what would you call it, lessons, right? These get exported. These get sent all over the world. And that's revealing the purpose of America, the plan for America as a country, as it was from the beginning, from its creation, from its inception. It was always going to be this global influence. It was going to be the place from which this assault on the other nations, cultures, peoples, communities, societies would be launched. And he said that at the beginning. He said the television allowed America to invade the living rooms of other countries, which is pretty amazing, I think. So another fantastic read. I think we got some real good juicy nuggets in that section, definitely. And so that is one to go back and review. The forming and shaping of national culture being the educational system and the mass media. So that admission that culture is created, culture is given to you. It's not yours. It's not just because you were born into it doesn't mean it's legitimate or authentic or real or valuable. You were just born into it, and your parents were born into theirs, and it was given to them, and it's all artificial. It is all created by other men, scientific men, psychopathic scientific men. Right? And this is the thing you got to remember. It's the thing you got to realize. Don't get emotional when somebody tells you that a certain aspect of what you believe or think or how you behave or what has just been given to you, right? It's not you don't have to get emotional about it. It's an opportunity to be curious and say, oh, where did I pick that up from? Where does that come from? You could do a bit of introspective exploration, and you can say, is that true? Is that really me? Or did I just absorb that growing up from a teacher, from an uncle or an auntie, from a parent, a sibling, a friend? I've talked before about how we really just absorb and copy a lot of things from the people around us. And if we grew up with a lot of television, a lot of radio, even a lot of books, even if we read a lot of books, we were absorbing and downloading things from the books. I go on about books all the time. It doesn't mean that all books are good and harmless. Most books are probably propaganda. The ones that are really available, the ones that are well known, famous, the ones that are celebrated, a lot of them have downloads and cultural updates and ideological tweaks in them that we take on board, especially in the era before television, when stories and novels and adventures would be people's entertainment. They would switch the radio on to tune into the latest episode of whatever drama was being broadcast, and they would buy the books and the series that were published in magazines and newspapers and the stories that went along each week. This is fiction, as Alan Watts says time and time again. Fiction is such an important and overlooked way to download tweaks and updates and cultural alterations to the public, to us, right? And so we have a lot of that in us, and it's part of our contribution to humanity to get in there and investigate that stuff and get rid of it if it's no good, and put it something and replace it with something that is good. And that's what I think we need to think about, is how much of ourselves is really us. How much of our personality is real, is authentic, is true to our soul, to our spirit, to our personality, to who we really are, right? That's a big question. And when we read these kind of books, and he's telling us right there that culture is manipulated, it's given to you, it's formed, it's created, it's passed on. They used to do it through the churches, and now they do it through the schools and universities. And in the future, they're going to do it through something else. I mean, he even talked about people being educated at home by way of their screens. He literally mentioned that in that section we just read. Just amazing. Just amazing. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's reading. We are going to be back next Friday. We're going to finish the book. It's International Prospect. And then the final section of the book, which is a community of the developed nations. And so this is probably leading to some sort of world global system plan or recommendation. But I don't know. Let's see. I could be wrong. They could surprise us. There could be some twist, some surprise ending at the end of the book. And you never know. It is Zbig after all, man of many talents. So the surprise ending could be something. Who we'll see where it goes. But thank you for hanging out with me tonight. It's been lovely indeed to spend this time with you. If you got value from the broadcast, please consider supporting allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. You can send a PayPal or buy me a coffee. But the best way to support is really to sign up to the school community. There's different tiers. There is different benefits and bonuses and access. If you subscribe to the middle tier, for example, then you get to join the weekly calls. There's a weekly live stream where I do a reading from the book we're studying, which I told you earlier is Political Pornology. So I read that on Wednesdays, 2 hours usually. You can sit in on that, and then on Tuesdays we have a discussion about what we read, and then there's also a couple of sessions which I call the campfire sessions, and that is just to hang out and get to know each other and talk to each other and talk about whatever comes up. There's no agenda. It's not recorded. There's no script. It is a place to spend time with like-minded people who care about these kinds of topics and are interested in learning about these sorts of books. That is the purpose. That's the point of a community, right? To have a place where people can hang out and contribute and get to know each other. So that is there. And that's the best way to support, in my opinion, because you can just sign up, set it and forget it, and then join in and get to know me and I get to know you, and we all benefit from an exchange of ideas and time and mutual learning. The learning that takes place when you're in a group discussion. People are sharing what they know, what they've learned, sharing resources and reflecting back to each other the ideas and the concepts. It's a lot more productive than just the input, right? When I'm doing these broadcasts, you might be listening and you're taking in the input. You also want this processing step, and then you want the output step. That's the trivium: input, processing, output. If you don't have the processing and the output steps, then you're only doing 1/3 of the process. It's not proper learning. It's kind of learning, but if you're not processing what you've learned by thinking about it and chewing on it a little bit and sort of comparing and contrasting it against other things you know, and then if you're not doing an output step where you're talking about it and sharing it and seeing what other people think about your ability to articulate and discuss and talk about these things, then you're missing part of the trick. And that is the fun bit, the processing and the output, especially the output. That's really the magical part, which is a lot of fun. So I encourage people, please consider joining the book club. That would be great to see you in there, of course. But if you can't, you don't have the budget for it, that's fine. No worries. You could sign up to my social media channels, share the videos. Word of mouth is the best way to get these things out and about there. I've got a lot of shorts uploading now, clips to YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, but mainly YouTube. And they're 2-3 minute bite-sized clips taken from various live streams, various books that we've discovered in the past. They're very digestible and easy to pass around and share around. So consider sharing one of those that you find interesting. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all that stuff. I'm sure you are fully aware of it by now. And I haven't even mentioned continuity of control, but I'm running out of steam. So continuityofcontrol.com. It's my email series where you can grab a load of very juicy quotes from a bunch of books that I have on the shelves behind me. And I'm just going to leave it there and play you out with a little bit of guitar music. Thank you all very much for hanging out. I will see you next Friday for the conclusion to Between Two Ages by Zbigniew Brzezinski. It's been a fantastic book indeed. I've learned a lot. I'm really glad we read it, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it ends next week. So take it easy, everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other. Have a good week. Stay warm. Do nice things for people, even if you don't like them, especially if you don't like them, because that is what it's all about, isn't it? It's having love in our heart for people who we might think don't actually deserve it. Let's have that love for our neighbor as we would like to be loved ourselves. So take it easy. Thanks for hanging out. Until next time, God bless.